The day they stripped my rank, I was already dead inside. I just hadn't told my body yet. They stood in a circle around me, 47 members of the Crimson Apex clan, the most powerful hunter organization on the Korean peninsula, and they looked at me the way you look at a stain on your shoe. My clan badge was in Chairman John Hyokdo's hand. My name had already been removed from the roster. The humiliation was procedural, almost boring. They'd done this before, stripped hunters of their rank like peeling the skin off fruit. Efficient, clean, no mess. Except I remembered all of it. I remembered this exact moment. The cold, gray conference room on the 14th floor of Apex Tower. The rain hitting the windows like it was trying to get in. John Hyokdo's cufflinks. Platinum, shaped like serpents eating their own tails. I remembered the way my hands shook the first time. I remembered how I begged. I remembered the sound my knees made against the marble floor. I wasn't going to kneel again. Not because I'd gotten stronger in the usual sense. Not because I'd trained harder or found some hidden technique or unlocked a dormant ability. No. The reason I wasn't going to kneel was simpler and more devastating than any of that. I'd already lived through everything that came next. Every trap they'd set. Every move John Hyokdo would make. Every ally he'd call in. Every lie he'd tell. Every door he'd try to slam in my face. I'd watched it happen once, and it had killed me. Slowly, comprehensively, in every way a person can be killed without their heart actually stopping. And now I was back at the beginning. So when John Hyokdo held out his hand for my hunter's seal, the small obsidian disc engraved with my rank and clan affiliation, the thing I'd bled for, the thing I'd given 7 years of my life to earn, I looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then I looked at him, and I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a nervous smile. The kind of smile that made the man standing to my left take a half step backward without knowing why. Actually, I said, I'll keep that. The room went so silent you could hear the rain. My name is Kang Siwon. Before I died, I was a B-rank hunter in the Crimson Apex clan, which sounds more impressive than it was. B-rank is the tier where they put people who are useful enough to keep around but not important enough to protect. I cleared dungeons. I ran support rotations. I carried equipment. I filed reports that nobody read. I spent 7 years being exactly as good as they needed me to be and exactly as forgettable as they required me to remain. I did all of it for one reason. Her name was Jeon Soyeon, and she was the chairman's niece, and I loved her with the specific, exhausting devotion of someone who believes that if they just try hard enough, eventually it will be enough. We'd grown up in the same hunter training academy. She was brilliant and sharp-tongued, and she had this way of looking at a dungeon map that made other hunters lean in like she was reading sacred text. She told me once, early on, that I was the only person in the clan who treated her like a person instead of a ranking. I thought that meant something. It didn't. The deal was arranged 18 months before I found out about it. John Hyokdo needed to consolidate political capital with the Park family, the 4th largest hunter conglomerate in the country, and the cleanest way to do that was a marriage alliance. Soyeon was the asset. Park Jun-ho was the buyer. And somewhere in that transaction, the decision was made that Kang Siwon, her long-term partner, her supposedly trusted companion, the man who had pulled her out of a collapsing A-rank dungeon 3 separate times, was a liability to the deal. I didn't find out until I was handed the termination notice. By then, Soyeon had already signed the engagement contract. By then, she'd already attended 2 formal dinners with Park Jun-ho. By then, apparently, she'd already told her uncle that she'd handle telling me herself and then quietly decided she didn't want to deal with the mess. The termination notice was handled by an HR assistant who couldn't maintain eye contact. I read the document twice. I asked if there was some mistake. The assistant said there wasn't. I asked if I could speak with Soyeon. The assistant said she was unavailable. I asked if I could speak with anyone. The assistant said the decision was final. I remember walking out of that building and standing in the street for, 20 minutes maybe, while taxis went by and the city moved, and I just stood there, holding a folder with my termination notice in it, trying to understand what shape my life was now. That was the first death, the one where you lose the person. The second death took 3 years. Because here's what nobody tells you about being a hunter who got stripped of their clan affiliation. The blacklist is real, it's invisible, and it's comprehensive. Every major clan in Seoul received an informal courtesy notice that Kang Siwon had been released from Apex for performance and reliability concerns. That was the exact phrase, performance and reliability concerns. I found out later that John Hyokdo had personally called 4 clan leaders to elaborate on those concerns. He was very thorough, very charming about it. I couldn't find work. I took solo contracts, the kind that no clan wants, the leftover dungeons in rural areas with minimal clearance bonuses and maximum danger. C-rank dungeons that should have had a team of 6, cleared with just me and whatever gear I could afford. I got hurt constantly. I healed badly. I started making decisions you only make when you've stopped caring whether you come back. The third death was a D-rank dungeon in Gangwon province that turned out to be mislabeled. an intelligence failure by the Hunter Association. The dungeon was actually B+, and it spawned a variant-class boss that I'd never seen documented anywhere. I fought it for 6 hours. I won. Barely. I collapsed on the dungeon floor next to the corpse of the thing that had almost killed me, and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, this is stupid. This is so stupid. I'm going to die in a ditch somewhere, and John Hyokdo is going to attend a charity gala that evening and not think about me once. The fourth death was when I went back to Apex to try again. I know how that sounds. But I was desperate, and I was broken. And somewhere in the wreckage of my logic, I had convinced myself that maybe if I could just get back in the building, just get 5 minutes in front of someone who had authority, I could explain. I could demonstrate. I could prove that the performance concerns were fabricated. I got as far as the lobby. John Hyokdo came down personally. He didn't have to do that. He could have sent security. But he came down, and he stood in the lobby of his building with its marble floors, and its soaring atrium, and its 40-meter portrait of himself on the wall. And he looked at me the way you look at a problem that has inconveniently returned. And he said 7 words. You should know better than to come back. The security team escorted me out. One of them, a young guy, maybe 22, apologized under his breath as he pushed me through the revolving door. I didn't even have the energy to be grateful. The 5th death was the actual one. A mislabeled A-rank dungeon 6 months after the lobby. I was leading a 4-person team of unaffiliated hunters, all of us working for a provincial clearance company that paid below minimum and asked no questions. The dungeon breached its grade in the 3rd chamber. The boss was an S-rank apparition, the kind that tears through dimensional barriers and pulls the worst version of your memories out of you and wears them like a suit. It hit me while I was already down, and I remember, while it was killing me, the thing it showed me wasn't anything that had happened. It showed me what could have happened. It showed me Kang Siwon at 35, not dead in a crumbling dungeon, but standing at the head of something, with power that didn't just come from rank or affiliation, with a calm that no one could touch, with people around him who were there because they chose to be. It showed me a version of my life where I hadn't wasted 7 years trying to be useful enough for a clan that never deserved me, and then it killed me. And then I woke up. 47 members of the Crimson Apex clan standing in a circle. John Hyokdo holding my clan badge. Rain on the windows. The serpent cufflinks. 7 years earlier. The day of my first death. I looked at the vision the S-rank apparition had shown me before I died. I looked at 47 faces, every single one of them wearing the same expression, somewhere between boredom and contempt. I looked at John Hyokdo's extended hand, and I knew. I knew with every single cell in my resurrected body exactly what was about to happen, exactly what every one of them was going to do, exactly which of them would betray which, exactly who would secretly be loyal, exactly what moves John Hyokdo would make in the next 3 years to tighten his grip on Korean Hunter Society. I knew all of it, which meant I was holding something far more dangerous than a clan badge. I'll keep that, I said, and the room went silent. John Hyokdo's hand didn't move. His expression didn't change. He was very good at that. The stillness, the measured non-reaction that communicated absolute authority without requiring him to raise a voice. He'd cultivated that stillness for 30 years. I used to find it intimidating. Now I just found it predictable. Kang Siwon. His voice was the same, that low, perfectly modulated baritone. The seal belongs to the clan. The seal was issued to me, I said. At the rank ceremony, I have the documentation. A murmur went through the room. Small, quickly suppressed, but I heard it. More importantly, John Hyokdo heard it. He looked at me for a moment, then he almost smiled. He thought this was going to be an argument he could manage. A lower-rank hunter getting emotional about paperwork, confused about procedure, easily overridden. He'd dealt with this before. It was a manageable problem. He was already wrong. The documentation specifies, he said, patient as a glacier, that the seal is the property of the clan and is held in trust by the member during their tenure. Upon termination, the seal is returned. The clause you're referring to, I said, applies to seals issued after the 2041 charter revision. My seal was issued in 2038, under the original charter. I paused, which means it's mine. The room was not silent this time. The murmur was louder, and it didn't suppress itself immediately. I wasn't making that up, by the way. I'd known about that clause for years. Discovered it by accident in year 3 when I was helping archive old administrative files, which was the kind of task that gets assigned to B-rank hunters who aren't important enough for real missions. But in my first life, it never occurred to me to use it. I was too busy trying not to make things worse. This time I'd been preparing for this moment since about 40 seconds after I woke up. John Hyokdo looked at his legal counsel, a thin man named Attorney Bayek, who was standing against the wall trying to blend into the paneling. Attorney Bayek gave a very small, very reluctant nod. The chairman's jaw tightened. just slightly, just enough for me to see it. Inside, I was almost laughing. Outside, I just looked at him, steady, patient. I held up my hand, palm up, and waited. He put the badge in my hand. The sound that went through the room was not a murmur this time. It was the sound of 47 people recalibrating their understanding of what they'd just witnessed. Because in the internal power language of the Crimson Apex clan, in the language of posture and precedent and who backs down first, what had just happened was not nothing. What had just happened was that Kang Siwon, a hunter they had all collectively decided was disposable, had just made John Hyukdo blink. I put the badge in my pocket. "Thank you for 7 years," I said. "I'll see myself out." I walked to the door. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. The room parted for me in that specific way. Rooms part for people they're not sure how to read anymore. One person, I noted it from the corner of my eye, didn't move immediately, stood there a beat longer than everyone else. Young, late 20s, with the kind of quiet self-possession that other people usually mistake for standoffishness. Ha Unbi. Grade. A-rank healer, the best in the clan. Possibly the best in Seoul, though the clan had been careful never to let that assessment reach the wider market. She'd been quietly assigned to my support rotation twice in the last year. Both times for reasons I'd never fully understood, since she was significantly overqualified for B-rank clearance teams. In my first life, I'd been grateful for her presence and vaguely puzzled by it, and had never thought about it much beyond that. She wasn't looking at John Hyukdo. She was looking at me. I pushed through the conference room door without acknowledging it, but I noted it, filed it, set it aside. I had a lot of work to do. The thing about having lived through something once is that grief becomes strategy. All the time I spent in my first life being confused and hurt and overwhelmed, all of that becomes advanced preparation when you know what's coming. I had a 3-year head start on every move John Hyukdo was about to make. I had names, dates, financial structures, contact chains. I had the entire topology of his power base mapped in my head like a city I'd spent years navigating in the dark. The first thing I did when I left Apex Tower was call a number I'd memorized 2 days ago. It rang twice. Then, Kang Siwon? "Director Lim," I said, "I believe we should talk." Lim Jae-hyun was the head of the Hunter Association's Independent Investigation Bureau, the unit responsible for auditing clan financial records and enforcing the guild taxation laws that every major clan in Korea violated routinely. In my first life, Lim had been investigating Apex for 18 months before the case was quietly buried by political pressure from above. I knew who applied the pressure. I knew the exact mechanism. I knew what evidence the investigation had almost reached before it was shut down. I knew where the bodies were buried. Not literally. Well, mostly not literally. "We've never spoken," Director Lim said carefully. "We're speaking now," I said. "I just left Apex Tower. I was a records access hunter for 7 years. I think you want to hear what I have to say before I decide who else to say it to." A pause, a long one. "My office," he said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. 8, I said. I'm a morning person." He almost laughed. 8. I hung up and stood on the sidewalk outside Apex Tower and looked up at the building. 40 floors of steel and glass. John Hyukdo's portrait was visible even from street level. 40 meters of it, running up the north-facing exterior wall, lit at night, visible from half a kilometer in every direction. In 3 years, I thought, looking at it, that portrait is coming down. Not because I hated him. I mean, I did hate him, at a certain level, in the way you hate the thing that killed you. But that wasn't the engine. The engine was cleaner than hate. The engine was certainty. I knew exactly how this ended, and unlike the first time, I wasn't going to let it end that way. The first meeting with Director Lim lasted 4 hours. I gave him 12 specific financial irregularities, 19 dates and corresponding transaction records that he could pull through legal channels, and 3 names, junior Apex accountants who, in my first life, had eventually cooperated with investigators after the initial case was buried, and a second, smaller investigation tried to reconstitute itself. I knew which of the 3 was most likely to talk early if approached correctly. I gave Director Lim a methodology. He sat across from me with the expression of a man who has just been handed a map to a mine he'd been trying to find for 2 years. "How do you know all of this?" he asked. 7 years of carrying boxes," I said. "People talk around you when they think you're furniture." He accepted that. People always accepted that. Nobody wanted to look too hard at a gift horse, especially when the horse was pointing at a man as powerful as John Hyukdo. The second thing I did was find a registrar, not a clan registrar, not any of the major guild affiliations. I registered as an independent hunter with no clan affiliation, which in the Korean hunter market carried roughly the same social weight as showing up to a black tie dinner in cargo shorts. The receptionist at the independent hunter registry had the decency not to say anything out loud, but she did check my rank twice, as though expecting to find a typo. "B rank?" she said. "For now," I said. Here's the thing about being a reborn hunter with 7 extra years of accumulated experience and the knowledge of every dungeon that the Korean Hunter Association would classify as A rank or higher in the next 18 months. Grinding rank wasn't going to be slow at all. I had a target on my back, a 3-year roadmap, and a very specific list of dungeons I intended to clear in a very specific order that would maximize both resource acquisition and rank advancement. I also had, courtesy of 7 years of administrative access, the complete internal records of every dungeon that Apex had claimed exclusive clearance rights on, including several that had been deliberately misclassified to prevent other clans from attempting entry. Misclassified downward in some cases, which meant the public-facing Hunter Association registry showed dungeons as safer than they were, dangerous for other hunters who might attempt them unaware, and misclassified upward in other cases, which meant Apex was sitting on dungeons rated too high for other clans to legally attempt, keeping the most valuable loot pools entirely to themselves. Both kinds of misclassification were illegal. I gave Director Lim 6 of the most egregious examples in our second meeting. By the end of week 2 of my new life, I had a meeting scheduled with one of the 3 Apex accountants I knew would eventually cooperate, a legal consultation booked with the Hunter Association's own enforcement division, and, courtesy of the first dungeon I'd cleared solo in my new life, a mid-tier B-rank gate in the Eastern District that I'd completed 3 times faster than any registered clear time because I knew exactly where the boss would spawn and exactly what its pattern was. Enough gate crystals to fund the next 6 months of my operation. The gate crystals were worth 340 million won. I deposited exactly 340 million won into an account that I opened under the name of a small logistics company I'd incorporated the day after my exit from Apex Tower. The company's official purpose was dungeon support services. Its actual purpose would become clear later. I was moving fast. I had to. Because in approximately 22 days from now, John Hyokdo was going to realize I hadn't disappeared, and then things were going to get interesting in the way that interesting things get when the most powerful hunter clan in Korea decides that you are a problem. I needed to be ready before Interesting arrived. Interesting arrived in 18 days. He was ahead of schedule, which I hadn't accounted for. Fine. I adjusted. The method of delivery was a visit from Park Gi-hun, Apex's head of clan relations, which was the title they gave to the man whose actual job was enforcing informal agreements with prejudice. In my first life, Park Gi-hun had been one of the people who drafted the blacklist notice that had been sent to every major Seoul clan. He was good at his job. He was smooth, well-dressed, and he had the particular kind of cheerfulness that predatory people use to make you feel like the situation is still friendly, even when it has absolutely stopped being friendly. He walked into the coffee shop I was using as an office, a small place in Mapo that didn't ask questions and had good Wi-Fi, and sat down across from me without asking if the seat was taken. "Kang Siwon," he said, "you've been busy." I was reading a report. I put it down with the unhurried patience of someone who has all the time in the world. "Park Gi-hun," I said. "You look exactly the same. A tiny beat." He hadn't expected that. The familiarity, the ease. He covered it smoothly. "The chairman would like to offer you a conversation," he said. "Informal, between adults, about the direction you seem to be taking things. Inside. Of course he would." I'd activated 3 of his tripwires in the past 18 days, and he was trying to figure out which one had set them off. Outside, I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. I put it down. "I'm available Thursday at 3, I said. "If he wants to meet, he knows where my office is." Park Gi-hun blinked. "Your office?" "Apex Tower lobby, actually. The coffee cart on the ground floor does good work. Tell him I'll be there at 3. He stared at me for a moment. This was not the response the script had prepared him for. The script had 2 versions. Either I was cooperative and grateful for the outreach, or I was defensive and frightened and easy to press. There was no version of the script where I sent back a counterproposal with a location that was inside his own building. "I'll relay the message," he said, very carefully. "Great," I said, and picked up my report again. He left. I waited until I could no longer see him through the window. Then I let myself grin for exactly 3 seconds. Then I went back to work. The Thursday meeting didn't happen, which I knew it wouldn't. John Hyokdo wasn't going to meet me in a location I'd proposed on terms I'd set. That wasn't how he operated. The counteroffer came Wednesday evening, through Park Gi-hun again. The chairman would see me in his private office on the 38th floor, Friday at 10, and this was not a request. I sent back a single-line message. "I'll be there." I was. At 10 o'clock exactly. The 38th floor of Apex Tower, which I had been on 3 times in 7 years because it was not a floor that B-rank hunters typically visited, the private office had a view of the Han River and the mountains beyond it. The furniture was the kind that exists to communicate that the man sitting behind it could buy your future and lose the receipt. John Hyokdo was behind his desk. Park Gi-hun was standing to his left. Attorney Bayek was in the corner. There were also two other people I hadn't expected. One was Jung Tae-yang, an SSS rank hunter, one of only 4 in Korea, technically unaffiliated, but with a long and well-known informal relationship with Apex that included a significant financial consulting arrangement I had complete documentation of. He was leaning against the window with the studied casualness of someone who wants you to notice that they are there without appearing to care whether you do. The other person was Ha Eunbi. She was standing near the door, away from the others, close to neither side. She had a tablet in her hands, and she was looking at the screen, but she wasn't reading it. Her eyes were still. She was listening. The moment I walked in, she looked up, and for a fraction of a second, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. I filed it, set it aside. "Sit down," John Hyuk-do said. "I'm comfortable standing," I said. "Thank you." The chairman studied me for a moment. He was reassessing. I could see it. The slight narrowing of eyes, the recalibration that happens when the person across from you is not behaving according to the expected model. "You've made some interesting choices in the past 3 weeks," he said. "I've been clearing dungeons," I said. "Working within the law, paying my taxes promptly." A pause. That last part especially. Attorney Bayek shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. "You've also been speaking with Director Lim at the Investigation Bureau?" John Hyuk-do said. Not a question. "I have," I said. "He's a fascinating man. Very thorough." "I'd like to know what you discussed. Inside." He doesn't know specifics yet. He knows I went in and he knows something was discussed, but the Investigation Bureau is walled off enough that he can't get the contents of those meetings directly. He's fishing. Outside. "Standard consultation," I said. "Administrative procedure stuff, the kind of thing you learn when you spend 7 years doing records work." The silence in the room had a texture to it now. It was the silence of 4 different people calculating 4 different things simultaneously. Park Gi-hun was calculating threat level. Attorney Bayek was calculating legal exposure. Jung Tae-yang was calculating relevance, whether this was interesting enough to pay attention to, or whether it resolved itself below his level. Ha Eunbi was looking at me again. Not calculating, just watching. "You're an unaffiliated B-rank hunter," John Hyuk-do said. "You have no clan, no backing, no infrastructure. You have, 3 or 4 weeks of income from solo gate clearance. And you're sitting across from me as though you have leverage." He said the last word with a very precise amount of dismissiveness, just enough to give me an opportunity to backpedal or get defensive, which would let him reframe the conversation on his terms. I didn't take the offer. "I don't need leverage," I said. "I'm just doing my job, clearing gates, filing paperwork, having meetings." I looked at him steadily. "Is there something specific you'd like to discuss, Chairman? Because I have a 1 p.m. appointment." I didn't have a 1 p.m. appointment, but I'd learned something in 7 years of watching powerful men operate. The most unsettling thing you can do to a powerful man is convince him that you have somewhere else to be. John Hyuk-do's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "There is one thing," he said. "The incident at the rank ceremony, the badge." "What about it?" "The clause you cited. Our legal team has reviewed it." He paused. "You were correct about the charter date. However, there is a secondary provision, added by amendment in 2039, that could be interpreted to supersede the original clause in cases of conduct-related termination. Inside, there it is. He spent a week finding a workaround, and he's presenting it now like he's doing me a favor by mentioning it before using it. Outside, I smiled, just slightly. I'm aware of the 2039 amendment. I'm also aware that it was never formally ratified by the full Apex board, only by the executive committee. Under the clan's own internal governance rules, an amendment of that kind requires board ratification to be enforceable. I tilted my head. "Attorney Bayek knows this. I expect he told you." Attorney Bayek's expression was the expression of a man who wished he were in a different building. "He did mention a concern," John Hyuk-do said. "So we're done with the badge," I said. "Is there anything else?" And then Jung Tae-yang, who had been leaning against the window with the expression of a man watching TV, straightened up. And he looked at me with the flat, evaluating look that SSS rank hunters get, the look that comes from being so powerful for so long that you have stopped needing to pretend to assess anything. "You were B rank," he said. It wasn't a question. It was barely a sentence. It was the verbal equivalent of picking something up and examining it. "Still am," I said. "Solo cleared a B rank dungeon last week in 47 minutes, he said. "Registered time. Confirmed by the association." The confirmed clear time for that dungeon's fastest previous record was 2 hours and 19 minutes by a 3-person team. "Good day," I said. "B-rank hunters don't do that," he said. "Apparently one does." He looked at me for another 3 seconds. Then he did something I hadn't fully anticipated. He nodded. Not respectfully, not dismissively, just acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge a data point that warrants continued observation. Then he went back to leaning against the window. Ha Eunbi made a sound, very small, almost nothing. Almost nothing that might have been, very quietly, a suppressed laugh. I didn't look at her, but I noted it, filed it. I think we're done here, I said, unless there's something concrete on the agenda. John Hyokdo looked at me for a long moment, and I saw it, the thing I had not seen in my first life, because the first time I had been too scared to look. A flicker. Not of respect, not yet, but of the thing that precedes respect in powerful men, which is the uncomfortable recognition that the person across from you is not operating within your map. For now, he said. Good, I said. Good morning, Chairman. Director Jung, Attorney Bayek. A pause. Aha, Eunbi. I'd used her name without a title. Intentional, informal. The kind of thing you do when you've decided, without making a production of it, that someone is on a different tier from the rest of the room. I walked out. In the elevator on the way down, I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds of adrenaline, the recognition, the flash of it, that I'd just done what I could never do the first time. That I just stood in that room with the full weight of Apex trying to read me and walked out standing. 5 seconds. Then I straightened up. Then the elevator hit the lobby. I had a dungeon to clear by noon. The next 2 weeks were a study in controlled velocity. I cleared 3 more B-rank dungeons, each one faster than any registered record, each one solo, each one logged with the association in real time, so the timestamps were unimpeachable. The resource haul was significant. The rank notification came at the end of week 2. I had been reclassified to A rank by the Hunter Association's autonomous assessment system, which triggered a mandatory public announcement per regulation. The announcement went out on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, 4 major clans had sent informal inquiries about affiliation. I declined all of them politely and noted the date in my calendar. I would revisit 2 of them in approximately 6 months, when my situation was different and their leverage was more useful. The resource deposits from the dungeons I'd cleared were sitting in the logistics company account now. I'd added to them. Total capital, 2. 1 billion won. Not from cheating the system, from knowing the system better than anyone who'd built it. From clearing dungeons that other hunters thought were too dangerous because the association's classified grade data was inaccurate, and I was the only person who knew the actual difficulty because I'd had access to Apex's private dungeon intelligence files. I reinvested most of it. Equipment for the next tier of clearance. A legal retainer with the firm that, in my first life, I would have needed desperately 18 months from now and been unable to afford. A small office, real office, not a coffee shop, in Gangnam, registered to the logistics company. I was also, quietly, building a reputation, the kind that doesn't come from press releases, but from results, from the way hunters talk at dungeon gates while waiting for a portal to stabilize, from the way the association's published clear records started carrying the name Kang Siwon with a frequency that made other hunters do a double take and check the affiliation field and find it blank. Unaffiliated. Solo. It was strange. It was honestly impossible by conventional understanding. But the records were the records. John Hyokdo felt it. I knew he did because Park Gi-hoon started showing up again, not to threaten this time, but to observe. I spotted him twice near dungeon gates I was scheduled to clear. He was careful about it. He kept distance. He took notes on his phone. He didn't approach. I let him watch. The night before the event that would tip the first domino, I sat in my Gangnam office with a city map and a dungeon assignment list, and I thought about timing, about how long I needed to keep accelerating before I hit the threshold, about which of Apex's moves I wanted to let land and which ones I needed to deflect. I was so focused that I didn't immediately register the knock at the door. The office was supposed to be empty. I'd given the one staff member I'd hired, a 23-year-old analyst named Min who asked excellent questions and never looked confused more than once about anything, the evening off. I looked up. Ha Eunbi was standing in the doorway. She was in civilian clothes, no Apex insignia, no gear. She had the same expression she'd worn in the conference room on the day of my exit, the same expression she had almost had in the 38th floor office, the one I had filed and set aside twice now. I could finally categorize it. It was curiosity, the specific, careful kind, the kind that does not announce itself. The door was unlocked, she said. Habit, I said. Old records work habit. You never know when someone needs to drop something off. I paused. Although I'll note that most people don't drop things off at 9 p.m. She didn't smile, but she stepped inside and she looked around the office with the methodical attention of someone cataloging what they're seeing. You've been busy, she said. Everyone keeps saying that. You cleared 4 gates in 2 weeks, she said. Each one solo, each one at a rate that the association's ranking algorithm has flagged as statistically anomalous. Good, I said. That's the point. She looked at me then, directly, with the quality of attention that very few people deploy in casual conversation. Why are you doing this? Clearing dungeons? Going after John Hyokdo? I was quiet for a moment. She knew. Not the details. She couldn't know the details yet, but the shape of it. She was, I recalled, exceptionally observant. It was one of the reasons she was the best healer in Seoul. Not because of her raw ability, which was extraordinary, but because she noticed things, discrepancies, patterns. Things that were said and things that were conspicuously not said. I'm not going after anyone, I said. I'm building something. By making him nervous. Is he nervous? She considered this. He's recalibrating, she said. Which is what he does when he encounters something he doesn't fully understand yet. A pause. He doesn't fully understand you. What about you? I asked. I don't fully understand you either, she said. But I'm more interested than I am uncertain. The distinction was precise enough that I almost stopped what I was doing to look at her properly. More interested than uncertain. It was a very specific way to put it. Why are you here? I asked. She reached into the bag she was carrying and set a small package on my desk. Inside, I could see through the tissue wrap, a calibrated healing compound in a blue glass vial, the kind used for sustained dungeon clearance where a healer isn't physically present. The kind that was, officially, available to A-rank hunters with clan affiliation and significant waiting list priority. You have a scheduled A-rank gate clearance tomorrow, she said. The equipment you purchased last week is good, but the recovery load for solo clearance at that grade will exceed your standard threshold. I stared at the vial. Then I looked at her. You pulled my association records. You're not affiliated with a clan, she said simply. Your records are semi-public. Anyone can see the gate assignments. Anyone can see them, I agreed. Not everyone acts on them. She didn't answer that. She picked up her bag and she turned toward the door and she said, quietly and without particular emphasis, as though it was simply a factual statement and not something that would stay with me long after she'd left. You're not what they said you were. And then she was gone. I sat in the empty office for a long moment. I looked at the vial on my desk. I thought about the fact that in my first life, in 7 years of working under the same roof as Ha Yunbi, she had never done anything like this, never gone out of her way, never pushed past the formal boundary. I had attributed it to indifference. I had assumed that professional distance was the whole picture. Maybe I had been wrong about something. I picked up the vial and examined it in the light. High grade, custom mixed. Not available over the counter. She'd made it herself. I set it down gently. Outside, somewhere across the city, my phone lit up with an alert. A Hunter Association emergency notification. The kind that only goes out when a dungeon gate has exceeded its containment threshold and broken through to the surface. I read it once, and then I went very still. Because the dungeon that had just breached its containment, the one currently tearing open in the middle of the Uido financial district, the one that was going to require an emergency response within the next 20 minutes, was not on any public schedule. It was one of Apex's misclassified gates, the ones that had been rated lower than their actual grade, the ones that, on paper, looked manageable, the ones that, in reality, were something else entirely. Which meant that, right now, in Uido, there were 3 Apex hunters being sent in to handle what they'd been told was a B-rank situation. And they were about to walk into something very, very different. My hand was already on my jacket. I was out the door before I'd finished reading the alert. The Yodo Financial District was 12 minutes from my office by taxi in normal traffic. At 9:43 on a Wednesday night, the traffic was not normal. The emergency notification had gone public 40 seconds after the internal one, and the first wave of evacuation vehicles was already clogging the arteries south of the island. I ran 3 blocks to where the roads were still clear, flagged a car, and spent the ride reading everything the association's emergency feed was pushing out in real time. Gate classification, B rank. Estimated containment breach, minimal. Assigned response team, Crimson Apex Emergency Unit, 3 hunters. ETA to containment, 18 minutes. Every single one of those numbers was wrong. I knew this gate. I knew it from the files. One of the 17 dungeons in Apex's private intelligence database that had been deliberately downgraded to prevent competitor clans from accessing the resource pool inside. The actual grade was A+, borderline S. The boss entity was a dimensional sovereign class. The kind that didn't just fight you, it rewrote the rules of the space you were fighting in. It could invert gravity in a localized area, manipulate the perceived passage of time for anyone inside its domain, and produce spectral copies of itself that were not copies at all, but fully functional combat entities with independent kill capacity. 3 B-rank hunters were walking into that, The taxi couldn't get within 4 blocks of the site. I got out and ran the rest. The perimeter was already half established. Association crowd control working with city police, pushing civilians back, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles creating a strobe effect across the glass faces of the finance buildings. I could see the gate from 2 blocks out, a 30-meter vertical tear in dimensional space, pulsing with that specific deep violet light that only comes off high-grade unstable rifts. It was already expanding. The containment estimate of 18 minutes was fiction. I pulled my hunter's ID and pushed through the perimeter without stopping to explain myself. The association officer on gate duty looked at my credentials, looked at my rank, freshly upgraded to A, and looked at the gate. "There's already a team inside," he said. "I know," I said. "How long ago did they go in?" 4 minutes. I did the math. 4 minutes in. The Dimensional Sovereign's ambient domain would be fully activated by minute 6. After that, the spatial distortion would begin affecting the gate's exit point, making extraction exponentially harder. I had maybe a 90-second window to get inside before the situation became significantly worse. "I'm going in," I said. "Sir, you're unaffiliated?" "The association's emergency charter, Section 14, Clause 3, I said, already moving. "Any A rank or above hunter may enter an active breach site in support capacity regardless of clan affiliation when lives are imminently at risk. Your own regulation." I went through this gate. The inside of a dimensional sovereign's domain is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The closest analogy is a building that has been picked up and shaken until nothing is where it started. Floors at angles, gravity pulling in 3 directions simultaneously, light behaving as though it's forgotten what it's supposed to do. The Apex team was in the 3rd chamber when I found them, which was actually the 5th chamber because the Sovereign had already begun rearranging the spatial sequence. 2 of them were down, not dead, contained. The Sovereign had encased them in constructs of compressed dimensional energy, the kind that put pressure on the body without breaking it immediately, letting it build. The 3rd hunter was still on his feet, but barely. He was using everything he had just to maintain his position against the gravity inversion the Sovereign was running, and it was burning him out in real time. The Sovereign was 20 meters tall and looked like someone had taken the concept of a storm and given it a skeleton. I had the advantage of knowing its pattern. Every dimensional Sovereign class entity has a sequence, a rotation of abilities it cycles through in combat because the cognitive load of a domain that large requires a structured approach, even for something that powerful. I had read the Apex file 3 times in the first week after my return, committed the pattern to memory, and spent 6 days thinking about exactly how I would fight this thing if I ever had to. Today was if I ever had to. I moved. The details of a dungeon fight don't translate well into words. Battles at this tier are not about strength. They're about information. About knowing which moment the Sovereign's gravity inversion would stutter as it shifted to the time distortion phase. About knowing the exact radius of each spectral copy's independent kill range. About knowing that the construct holding the 2 downed hunters would release automatically when the Sovereign lost more than 40% of its total domain energy, because it needed that energy for its own structural integrity. I had all of that. The Apex team had none of it, because the file that contained it was classified inside their own organization, and the people who could have briefed them on it had declined to do so, because doing so would have required admitting the gate was misclassified. 41 minutes after I entered the gate, I walked back through it. The 2 contained hunters were behind me, shaky on their feet but intact. The 3rd hunter, the one who'd still been standing, was on my left, and he hadn't said a single word since the Sovereign dropped. He was just looking at me with the flat, comprehensive look of someone who has just watched something that doesn't fit in their existing framework and is waiting for their brain to produce a new one. The association officer at the perimeter was already on his radio. Behind him, I could see the flashing lights of more vehicles arriving, including pulling up in a black SUV with the red and gold Apex insignia on the door, Park Gi-hun. He stepped out and looked at the closed gate, looked at the 3 Apex hunters behind me, looked at me. I waited. "You went in," he said. "Someone had to," I said. "Your hunters are fine, by the way." "You're welcome." His jaw was doing something careful. "The association will want a report." "I've already filed one," I said, verbally to the officer on site, including a note about the gate's actual classification versus its registered classification. I looked at him steadily. "The discrepancy is significant." Park Gi-hun went very still. "The association audit team will want to look at that," I continued. "I expect Director Lim will be interested as well, since it intersects with some of the material we've discussed." I picked up my jacket from where I'd set it at the perimeter edge before going in. "Good night, Director Park." I walked away while he was still processing. The story was going to be in the Hunter Association's public incident log by morning. The details of a misclassified gate. 3 Apex hunters entering what they'd been told was a B-rank encounter. An unaffiliated A-rank hunter going in solo after them and completing the clearance. and a discrepancy that was going to require an explanation. John Hyokdo's response came faster than I'd expected, which meant he'd read the situation better than I'd given him credit for, which meant I needed to recalibrate my timeline slightly. The response arrived in two phases. Phase 1 was social. Within 48 hours of the Uido incident, the informal narrative was in circulation. Kang Siwon had violated protocol by entering an active, Apex-assigned gate without authorization, had interfered with an ongoing clan operation, and the exceptional clear time was the result of having used the contained Apex hunter's previous damage to the Sovereign, not solo capability. The story was clean and plausible if you didn't look too hard at the actual combat log, which the Association's public records included in summary form. The summary was abstract enough that most people wouldn't check the details. Most people. Phase 2 was financial. 3 of the small dungeon clearance companies I'd been negotiating contracts with, the kind that operate in the middle tier, handling B to A rank gates in secondary cities, profitable enough to provide steady income without requiring clan affiliation, sent cancellation notices within 4 days of the Uido incident. All 3 cited restructuring of priorities. All 3 had, per information I had filed from my years of records access, existing financial relationships with Apex-affiliated funds. He'd made calls. Inside, of course he did. This is almost exactly what happened in the first life. 8 days instead of the projected 12. The speed is the only real surprise. Outside, I read the cancellation notices with the serenity of a man reviewing mildly interesting weather reports. I'd anticipated this, not the exact timing, but the mechanism. John Hyokdo's preferred method of dealing with problems below his direct level of engagement was economic strangulation. Cut off revenue streams, isolate the target from institutional support, make the environment hostile enough that the problem eventually relocated itself without requiring direct confrontation. It was elegant and deniable, and it had worked on me spectacularly in my first life. This time, I had 2 advantages he didn't know about. The first was capital. The 2, 1 billion won in the logistics company account meant I could absorb economic pressure for a significant period without the stress-induced bad decisions that had derailed me in the first life. Running scared costs money. Not being scared saves it. The second was intelligence. I knew which of those 3 companies had sent the cancellation notices under duress, and which one had done it enthusiastically. The enthusiastic one was run by a man named Director O, who had a personal relationship with Park Gi-hun, going back 15 years, and who would not be recoverable as a business partner regardless of circumstance. The other 2 were protecting themselves from pressure they didn't want to face. That was different. That was workable. I called them both directly. Named what had happened without making it sound like an accusation, made them a counteroffer that was sufficiently more lucrative than their current Apex-adjacent arrangements that the protection money calculation simply stopped making sense. One came back within a day. The other took 3 days and a second call, but came back. The social narrative was thornier. The problem with a clean, plausible story is that it doesn't require evidence. It just requires repetition. John Hyokdo had 47 clan members and an extensive network of allied clan relations people to repeat it. I was one person with no PR infrastructure and a recently acquired A rank that the same narrative was working to undermine. But I needed a public forum, something that couldn't be reframed after the fact. I got one when the Hunter Association's quarterly combat assessment was scheduled for 2 weeks after Uido. The quarterly assessment is an open event, mandatory for ranked hunters to maintain current certification, attended by association officials and, typically, clan representatives who use it to scout for talent and verify claims. It's one of the few places in the hunter ecosystem where your performance is assessed in real time, in front of witnesses, with results that go directly into the public record in a form that cannot be edited after the fact. I registered for the A rank tier. This was, by design, visible. The registration is published. Any associated clan or organization can see who's participating. John Hyokdo saw it within an hour of my registration. His response was to personally attend. He arrived with an entourage of 8, Park Gi-hun, Attorney Baek, 3 senior clan members, and 2 others I identified as representatives from the Park family, his potential in-laws and political allies. The 9th person was Young Taeyang, the SSS rank hunter who appeared to have come of his own accord because he was standing slightly apart from the Apex group with the expression of a man who has decided that this is worth showing up for. And then, standing near the assessment field's eastern observation area, in civilian clothes with no clan insignia, was Ha Yunbi. She wasn't with the Apex group. She wasn't with anyone. She was standing with a coffee in her hand and the detached attentiveness of someone who happened to be here and happened to be paying complete attention. I noted it, set it aside. The A-rank assessment runs 5 stations, each testing a different combat and decision-making capacity. Speed, spatial reasoning, multi-target management, sustained endurance, and adaptive response to unknown variables. The adaptive response station is the one that matters. because it generates a completely new scenario for each participant, and the results are mathematically irreproducible, which means they can't be attributed to prior knowledge. I went through the first 4 stations at a pace that drew commentary from the association assessors, not because I was trying to be showy about it. I was genuinely just operating at the level I was at, which was the level of someone who had cleared an A+ dungeon 3 weeks ago and had 7 additional years of actual combat experience, stacked invisibly on top of their registered record. The 5th station is where it became a moment. The adaptive response generator produced a scenario. A collapsing dimensional structure with 4 simulated trapped civilians, 2 hostile entities at different positions, and a time limit that had been mathematically calibrated to be insufficient for a standard A-rank response pattern. The idea is to see how the hunter prioritizes under impossible conditions, what they sacrifice, how they think. I looked at the scenario for 11 seconds. Then I did something the assessment parameters didn't anticipate. I used the first hostile entity's attack trajectory as a vector to destabilize the second entity's position, effectively using one threat as a weapon against the other, while using the structural collapses falling sequence, which has a predictable pattern if you know what to look for, to create a temporary stable zone that the civilians could reach without requiring me to hold a defensive position simultaneously. It took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The passing threshold for the station was 8 minutes. The assessment room went quiet. The lead assessor looked at the result panel for a long time. Then she looked at me. Then she said, to the room in general, in the tone of a person making a note to self in public by accident, "That's not a solution pattern we have documented." From the observation area, I could hear, in the specific silence that had settled over the watching crowd, John Hyuk-do's intake of breath. Barely, almost nothing. Jung Taeyang, from his position slightly apart, said quietly to no one, And Ha Yunbi, whom I could see from the corner of my peripheral vision, set down her coffee on the railing beside her, carefully, like she needed her hands free. The results posted to the public record within the hour. A-rank assessment, top score by a margin of 41%. The narrative about my Uido performance relying on pre-damaged structures didn't survive contact with numbers generated in a controlled environment with no dungeon history to borrow. John Hyuk-do knew it. The Park family representatives were already talking quietly to each other. I could see Park Gi-hoon watching them, calculating damage. I collected my certification documentation and was heading for the exit when one of the senior clan members from the Apex group stepped into my path. His name was Vice Chairman Lee Dong-hyun, late 50s, built like a retired combat hunter, which he was, with the added authority of being John Hyuk-do's longest-serving lieutenant. "Impressive performance," he said. The word impressive was doing a lot of work it hadn't volunteered for. "Thank you," I said. "The chairman would like to discuss a reinstatement offer," he said. "The misunderstanding around your departure—" "There wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. A pause. "Regardless, your skills are clearly—" "Vice Chairman Lee," I said, "with respect, no." He blinked. "No? No. Not now. Not with different terms. Not after a waiting period. The answer is no." I looked at him pleasantly. "Please relay that to Chairman John." I paused. "Also, please tell him I hope the gate classification audit goes smoothly. Those things can be complicated." I walked past him. Behind me, I heard someone else fall into step. "You're going to make him desperate," Hyunbi said, from slightly behind my left shoulder. "I know," I said. "Desperate men make irrational moves." "I know that too." A beat of silence as we moved through the assessment center's exit corridor. I hadn't invited the conversation, and she hadn't asked permission for it. It was simply happening with the naturalness of something that had already decided to be. "The adaptive response station," she said. "The second hostile entity, you redirected its attack vector using the first entity's projected trajectory 12 seconds before the first entity actually moved." I didn't say anything. "That's not prediction," she said. "That's not assessment. That's a specific kind of knowledge." Another beat. "I've seen that pattern before." "Once?" I looked at her then. "SSS rank hunter I worked with 2 years ago," she said. "In a field operation." He described the cognitive approach afterward. He called it retrospective mapping. She paused. "He said it was something hunters occasionally develop after a severe near-death experience, when the brain reorganizes sensory processing around survival probability calculation." She met my eyes steadily. "You didn't have any recorded near-death events before your Apex exit?" She was not asking whether I had them. She was noting that they weren't recorded. "People have all kinds of experiences," I said. She looked at me for another moment, then, very quietly, "I know." And she walked away. I had dinner alone that night at a place near the Han River. Small restaurant, good jjigae, the kind of place that doesn't play music and doesn't rush you. I sat with a bowl of sundubu and thought about Ha Eunbi saying, I know with the weight of someone putting a period at the end of a sentence they'd been composing for a while. In my first life, she had been, as I noted, overqualified for my rotation assignments. I had thought it was administrative randomness. Now I was revising that assumption. Now I was thinking about the specific way she positioned herself in rooms, away from the group, close to neither side, the way she watched, the way she moved in to fill gaps, with the healing compound, with the coffee, with the precise and unprovable observation about near-death cognitive restructuring, with the efficiency of someone who has already thought several steps beyond the current moment. What I had attributed to indifference might have been the opposite thing entirely. I sat with that for a while, then my phone rang. Not a notification, an actual call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. Kang Siwon, a voice I didn't immediately place. Older. Careful. This is Kim Sung-il, Director Kim. I believe you've spoken with some of my colleagues at the association. Director Kim Sung-il was the head of the Hunter Association's Ranking and Classification Committee. He was, in the internal hierarchy of Korean hunter regulation, one of the foremost powerful people in the ecosystem. He was also, per my record's knowledge, one of the two committee directors who had declined to push back when the political pressure came down on Lim Jae-hyun's first investigation into Apex. He was not someone who called unaffiliated hunters at dinner time. Director Kim, I said, this is unexpected. The quarterly assessment results were posted an hour ago, he said. I reviewed them personally. I appreciate the thoroughness, I said. There's a matter we'd like to discuss, he said. Formally, through the association, not informally. It concerns your clearance records, your assessment results, and a concurrent investigation that your conversations with Director Lim have apparently accelerated. Inside, he's been watching the investigation. He may be trying to get ahead of whatever Lim is building before it implicates the committee's past decisions. Inside, or he may be preparing to do something about it. I'm available, I said. Thursday morning. Wednesday, he said. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. 2 people this week had pushed my suggested time forward by a day. I was either getting more efficient or more alarming. 8 o'clock, I said. I'll be there. He hung up. I looked at my sundubu, which had gone slightly cold. I ate it anyway. Outside, the river was doing what rivers do, moving without urgency toward wherever it was going, indifferent to quarterly assessments and gate classifications and phone calls from committee directors. I thought about timing again, about the pace of things, about the way a chain of actions builds momentum and how momentum, once it reaches a certain threshold, stops being yours to fully control. I thought about how Yoonbi saying, "You're going to make him desperate." And I thought, yes, that's part of the plan. What was not part of the plan was what happened 40 minutes later, when I was walking back from the restaurant toward the parking structure where I'd left my car. And the 4 men were not subtle about it. They weren't meant to be. Subtle intimidation is for situations where you want the target to feel nervous without having anything concrete to report. Unsubtly, showing 4 large men in a dark street is a message of a different kind. The message is, we're past the stage where we care about plausibility. That meant John Hyuk-do was moving faster than his usual pattern. I stood still and looked at the 4 men. They had the build of combat hunters, not the frame of someone who works out for health, the frame of someone whose body has been restructured by sustained, high-intensity exposure to dimensional energy, which does specific things to muscle density and reaction time. All 4 of them were at least B rank. One of them, the one standing slightly ahead of the others, might have been A. I did a very fast calculation. I could win this fight. Probably. With acceptable damage to myself. The problem was the street, not entirely empty. 2 civilians visible at the far end. A delivery vehicle parked outside the restaurant behind me. A combat exchange here had collateral risk, which I wasn't willing to take, and it would also produce a police and association report that John Hyuk-do's legal team would frame in whichever direction was most damaging to me before I could respond. So I didn't fight. I took out my phone, unhurried, with the same patience I'd used in every room with John Hyuk-do, and I pressed record. The lead man, the potential A rank, watched me do this. He watched me hold the phone up, camera facing them, timestamp running. He looked at the phone, then he looked at me, then he looked at the phone again, and the calculation was very visible on his face. The thing about intimidation is that it requires the other party's fear to function. Without the fear, you just have 4 large men standing in a street being recorded at a time of night that no plausible innocent explanation covers. And if that recording goes somewhere, if it gets flagged to the association's conduct office, if it ends up in a news feed, if it surfaces during an audit. He held up his hand. The other stopped. Wrong street, he said. Flat. Clean. Happens, I said. They left. I watched them go. I saved the recording to 3 separate cloud locations before I'd walked another 10 meters. Then I sent a copy to Director Lim with a timestamp note and no additional context. Then I kept walking. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me a little. In my first life, even thinking about confrontation like that had made my hands shake. Tonight I felt not calm exactly, but settled. The way you feel in a dungeon when you know the boss pattern and you know your own capacity and the only thing left is execution. I reached my car. I got in. I sat for a moment. And then I thought about the one thing in today's sequence that I hadn't fully processed yet. The assessment center. The adaptive response station. After the results were posted in the corridor on the way out, before Vice Chairman Lee had tried his script on me, I had seen from the periphery of my attention something that had registered but not fully landed until now. The Park family representatives, the two men who had come with John Hyok-do as political witnesses, who were meant to see his power in action today, had spent the last 20 minutes of the assessment not watching me. They had been watching John Hyok-do. The specific way you watch someone when you're reassessing whether the arrangement you've committed to still makes sense. I sat with that, ran it forward, thought about what that might look like in 3 weeks, in 6 weeks, in 3 months if I continued to accelerate on this trajectory. And then I thought about the gate tonight, the Yoito breach, the 4 hunters outside the restaurant, the pace of John Hyok-do's escalation. He was moving faster than his pattern because he was reading threat more clearly than he usually did at this stage, which meant he was going to do something I hadn't anticipated on the original timeline, something bigger, something that required more reach than informal pressure and contract cancellations. I needed to know what. I started the car. My phone lit up on the seat beside me, a message from a number I'd saved 6 days ago under a single initial, from H4 words. Be careful tomorrow. Wednesday. I stared at the screen. Wednesday was my meeting with Director Kim, a meeting Ha Yunbi had no way of knowing about because I hadn't told anyone, because the call had come 2 hours ago to a number registered to a legal entity that had no public connection to my name. 4 words. Be careful. Wednesday. Which meant she had a source I didn't know about. Which meant her access to information ran in channels I hadn't mapped yet. Which meant the picture I had of Ha Eunbi, careful, observant, keeping distance, performing small individual acts of precise support, was not the complete picture. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "How do you know about Wednesday?" The 3 dots appeared, stayed, then disappeared. No response came. I put the car in drive. My mind was running 2 tracks simultaneously, the Wednesday meeting, the 4 men in the street, John Hyok-do's accelerating timeline, and underneath both of them, steady as a current, the 4 words on my phone screen. Be careful tomorrow. Wednesday. And the question that had no answer yet, who was Ha Eunbi connected to that I didn't know about, and had she been placed in my orbit on purpose, and if so, by whom, and for what? The city moved around me. The river was behind me now, the lights of Gangnam ahead. I drove toward them and waited for Wednesday to arrive. Wednesday arrived the way bad days always do, quietly, with good weather, as if the sky had decided to be ironic about it. I was at the Hunter Association's main office building at 7:58, 2 minutes early. The lobby was the kind of space that communicates institutional permanence. High ceilings, the association seal embedded in the floor in polished granite, plaques on the walls listing the names of hunters who had died in the line of duty going back to the first gate opening in 2019. I walked across the seal without looking down, the way I always did, and took the elevator to the 14th floor where Director Kim's office occupied the corner with the best view of the city. Ha Yunbi's message was still unanswered on my phone. I had decided, after 40 minutes of driving and thinking the previous night, that pressing her for an explanation was the wrong move. Not because I wasn't going to find out. I was going to find out. But because the timing mattered. She had reached out. She had offered a warning. Whatever her connection was, whatever channel had given her that information, pressing on it immediately would either close it or force a reveal before she was ready to give one. Neither outcome served me. So I waited. Director Kim Sung-il was exactly as I'd expected from the voice on the phone. A man in his mid-60s who had survived 30 years at the top of Hunter bureaucracy by being genuinely intelligent and profoundly cautious. He shook my hand with the measured warmth of someone who has learned to communicate friendliness without communicating anything that could later be held against him. He had 2 people with him, an assistant I didn't recognize and Director Lim Jae-hyun, whose presence changed the texture of the room immediately. I'd seen Lim 3 times in the past month. Each time he'd grown incrementally more tense in the way that investigators get tense when a case is building faster than the institutional framework can safely contain it. Today, he looked like a man holding a live wire and trying to figure out where to put it down without anything catching fire. "Thank you for coming," Director Kim said. "Of course," I said. I sat. I waited. Kim organized his hands on the desk in the way people do when they've been rehearsing how to open. "The quarterly assessment results," he began, "combined with your recent gate clearance record, have prompted a discussion at the committee level about your classification status." My A rank was confirmed 3 weeks ago, I said. It was, he agreed. The discussion is about whether A rank remains the accurate assessment. Inside, here it is. Outside, I kept my expression interested and neutral. I'm listening. The assessment results, Kim continued, placed you 41% above the second highest score in an A rank cohort, with a solution pattern that our own assessors could not categorize within existing documentation. He paused. Combined with your solo clearance of an A+ gate that our subsequent incident review has confirmed, was the actual grade of the Uito breach. He stopped. The committee believes your current classification may be significantly below your operational level. What are you proposing? I asked. An S-rank evaluation, Director Lim said. He said it the way you say something that has been the subject of argument for several days and has finally been permitted to be said out loud. I let a beat of silence land before I responded. Not from surprise. I had known this was the likely outcome of the assessment performance, had in fact planned for it, but because the silence was useful, it communicated appropriate gravity without communicating anything that could be misread. That's a significant step, I said. Yes, Kim agreed. It would also, he continued with the careful precision of a man delivering a message inside a message, make certain ongoing conversations about your investigative cooperation significantly more complicated for parties who might prefer those conversations to stop. Aw, there it was. The real reason for the meeting, not just bureaucratic recognition of my performance, but political positioning. An S-rank evaluation was a public process with full association endorsement. It was, effectively, institutional armor. If the evaluation proceeded and I passed, I would be operating at a level where informal pressure campaigns and contract cancellations and 4 men in a dark street became not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive. Because any visible move against an S-rank candidate under active association assessment created the kind of scrutiny that powerful organizations preferred to avoid. Kim was telling me that someone in the association, possibly himself, possibly through Lim, had decided that having me operating at full capacity with full institutional backing was preferable to whatever John Hyokto was currently doing to the political equilibrium of the Hunter ecosystem. I was being offered a shield, and Kim was smart enough not to say that out loud. When would the evaluation be scheduled? I asked. 10 days, Kim said, if you agree to proceed. I thought about it for exactly long enough to be credible. I agree to proceed, I said. Kim nodded, and the faint release of tension in his shoulders was visible to anyone watching for it. There's one more item, he said. The gate misclassification documentation you've provided to Director Lim. The scope of it. Yes. It's extensive, Kim said, with the tone of a man who has just found out a structural problem in a building he lives in. More extensive than our initial review suggested. 17 gates, I confirmed. Documented grade discrepancies ranging from 1 tier to 3 tiers. The 3-tier discrepancies represent the most significant liability from a public safety standpoint, including the Uito gate. Including the Uito gate, I agreed, where 3 hunters entered a situation they were not equipped or briefed to handle based on classification data their own organization had deliberately falsified. The word deliberately sat in the room for a moment. That's a serious allegation, Kim said carefully. It's a serious documentation, I said. The allegation follows from the documents. Kim exchanged a look with Lim. Something passed between them. The specific communication of 2 people who have already had a long conversation about something and are now watching that conversation's conclusion arrive in real time. The audit will proceed formally, Kim said, through standard association channels. Unobstructed. Good, I said. It will take approximately 3 weeks to reach the stage where formal notifications are issued to the relevant parties. 3 weeks. Which meant John Hyokto would receive a formal audit notification at roughly the same time as, or shortly after, my S-rank evaluation result was posted publicly. The timing was not accidental. Kim had engineered it deliberately. I looked at him with a new degree of respect for how he'd constructed this. Thank you, Director Kim, I said. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, with the smooth reciprocity of a man who has done this 1,000 times. Director Lim will be in touch. I stood. I shook hands again. I left. In the elevator going down, I pulled out my phone and sent a message to the contact saved under H. Wednesday was fine. Thank you for the warning. The 3 dots appeared. Then, good. Then nothing else. I had 9 days before the S-rank evaluation. I used them. Day 1 through 3, dungeon clearance. 2 A-rank gates, solo, logged, and timestamped. The resource hall added another $800 million to the company account. I wasn't resting. I was building a margin between what I had and what I needed, between where I was and where I was going. Every day of the first life I had spent barely surviving. I thought of now as a day I could spend building forward. Day 4, a meeting with the analyst Min, who had graduated from asking excellent questions to providing excellent answers. I gave him a specific project, cross-referencing the Hunter Association's public gate registration database against Apex's known clearance territory, claims to identify every gate that showed a potential classification discrepancy, not just the 17 I already had. He came back in 6 hours with 23 additional candidates. Day 5, I sent 4 of the 23 to Director Lim with supporting documentation. The other 19 I kept, not because they weren't relevant, they were all relevant, but because information released in stages is information that retains strategic value. All at once, it becomes a document. Over time, it becomes a pattern. And a documented pattern of behavior is more damaging than any individual incident. Day 6, Ha Yunbi called. Not a message this time. A call, which was different, more deliberate. The fact of choosing a call over a message when you're someone who has been communicating almost exclusively in careful, considered text means you've decided something requires a voice. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay, I said. John Hyuk-do is meeting with the Park family tomorrow, not the informal meetings they've been having, a formal session. The engagement announcement between Soyeon and Park Junho is being accelerated. A pause. The original timeline was 3 months from now. They've moved it to 2 weeks. I was quiet. That's not the part I'm calling about, she said. The meeting is also covering something else. There's a proposal on the table from the Park family, endorsed by John Hyuk-do, to petition the Hunter Association's Conduct Committee to open a formal disciplinary review of your recent gate entries. On what grounds? Unauthorized entry into clan-assigned clearance zones, the Yoido incident, framed as interference rather than emergency support. Her voice was level, providing information without commentary. The specific clause they're planning to cite, Section 22, Clause 8, allows the Conduct Committee to place a temporary operational suspension on a hunter under review, pending the outcome of the disciplinary process. I sat with that. An operational suspension during the 10-day window before my S-rank evaluation. If the Conduct Committee accepted the petition, which required only a preliminary finding of reasonable grounds, not a full investigation, I would be barred from gate entry, which would prevent me from demonstrating the operational performance the S-rank evaluation required. And if I missed the evaluation window, I remained at A rank, which meant the institutional protection director Kim had engineered was gone, and John Hyuk-do's informal pressure campaigns became viable again. The legal argument was thin. Section 22, Clause 8, had been written for situations of deliberate territorial encroachment, not emergency rescue operations. But thin legal arguments, filed by the right lawyers with the right relationships, can survive long enough to cause maximum damage before being overturned. He'd found the window, the one gap in the timeline I'd built. And he was going to try to fit a crowbar into it. Inside, okay, this is the move. This is what Ha Yunbi's warning was about. He's going to file within the next 24 to 48 hours before I can prepare a counter-response. Outside, when is the filing going to happen? Tomorrow afternoon, she said. After the Park family meeting, they want the family's endorsement on the petition as a secondary signature. It strengthens the political weight of the filing. I thought about this, about the sequence, about what I had and what I needed and how much time I was actually working with. Ha Yunbi, I said, how are you getting this information? A silence. Not the evasive kind. The kind that comes before something that has been held for a while and has now decided it's time to not be held anymore. Before I transferred to Apex's operational division, she said, I spent 4 years on the association's internal investigation support team. I still have colleagues there. Some of them are on the conduct committee. Another pause. Some of them have been watching John Hyuk-do for a long time. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them. You were in the investigation division, I said. 4 years, she confirmed. I transferred when I was offered the A-rank healer position at Apex. The resource access for someone at my level was significantly better inside a major clan, but I maintained my connections. I thought about her being assigned to my support rotation twice in the previous year, about the way she positioned herself in rooms, about the calibrated healing compound left on my desk, about the careful, methodical way she had been, what was the word, present, in my orbit, consistently and without obvious reason. I thought about the fact that the last 2 warnings she'd given me had been specific, actionable, and correct. You transferred to Apex, I said slowly, and then got assigned to the operational division that handles B to A rank clearance support. Yes, which would give you regular contact with mid-tier hunters across multiple departments. Yes, including records access hunters. A pause. Yes. How long? I said. Were you watching me before I left Apex? The silence this time was longer. 18 months, she said. I sat very still. The investigation into Apex's gate misclassification was Lim Jae-hyun's, she said. But the initial tip that started it came from my division. The association's investigation support team had flagged 3 anomalous clearance reports from Apex gates, reports that showed resource yields inconsistent with the gate's registered grades. Someone needed to be inside Apex with records access to find the actual documentation. She paused. You were the only B-rank hunter in Apex with records access who wasn't compromised. I thought about carrying boxes. I thought about filing reports nobody read. I thought about 7 years of being furniture. You were going to approach me, I said, before I left. I was building toward it, she said quietly. The timeline moved faster than I expected. The exit happened before I could... A pause. By the time I found out you'd been terminated, you were already gone. And then you were on the blacklist, and I couldn't make contact without the connection being visible. And when I came back, I said, the conference room, the 38th floor. I was trying to reassess, she said. You weren't the same. I'm not, I agreed. Another silence. A different kind this time. The kind where 2 people are both standing in a space that just got larger than either of them expected. The filing is tomorrow afternoon, she said, returning to the operational. You have until then. I know what to do, I said. Okay, she said. She didn't hang up immediately. There were 3 seconds where the call was open and neither of us said anything, and those 3 seconds had a weight to them that I noted and set aside for later. Then she hung up. I sat for 60 seconds doing nothing. Then I picked up my phone and called my legal retainer. Here's what I had that John Hyokdo did not know I had. Section 22, Clause 8 of the Hunter Association's Conduct Code, the clause he intended to use against me, has a counter provision that is not widely known because it was added by amendment in 2043, and the amendment was authored by a conduct committee member who was later involved in a separate controversy that caused his name to be removed from committee documentation. The counter provision states that a Section 22 disciplinary petition cannot be filed against a hunter who is currently under active evaluation proceedings for rank advancement if the evaluation was formally scheduled prior to the petition filing. My S-rank evaluation had been formally scheduled 4 days ago. The petition would fail the moment it was filed. If my legal team moved to register the counter provision with the conduct committee before the petition was accepted into the review queue, the review queue opened at 9 a.m. daily. If the petition was filed in the afternoon, as Hayunbi had said, and my counter registration arrived before 9 a.m. the following morning, the petition would be rejected at the administrative level before it could even reach the committee for a preliminary review. I called my legal team at 9 p.m. By 11 p.m., the counter registration documentation was complete, filed electronically, and confirmed received by the Conduct Committee's administrative office. John Hyokdo's filing arrived the following afternoon at 2:37 p.m. The rejection notification was sent at 2:51 p.m., 14 minutes. The administrative office's fastest rejection processing time in the past 18 months, per a public record request I had filed in advance, because I knew I would eventually need to know that number. The rejection was public record, which meant it was visible to anyone who checked the Conduct Committee's filing log, which anyone with association member access could do, which meant it was visible to the Park family representatives, who were almost certainly monitoring the filing because they had co-signed it. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. I could trace the shape of what was happening through the signals, through Park Gi-hoon's sudden silence, where there had been consistent low-level probing activity, through Attorney Bayek's office filing a request to review the counter-provisions amendment history, through a call I received the following day from a number I recognized as belonging to the Park family's own legal department. I didn't take that call. Let them sit with it. 3 days before the S-rank evaluation, I cleared an A-rank gate in Incheon that the association had been scheduling team clearances on for 6 months without successfully closing it. 4 previous team entries, all failures, all due to the same fundamental misunderstanding about the boss entity's ability to phase between dimensional layers during its vulnerability windows. I went in alone at 6 in the morning and came out at 8:40 with the gate crystal in my bag and a clearance record that the association's Incheon office posted publicly within the hour. By noon, the story was everywhere in the hunter community. Not the mainstream news. The hunter community has its own information ecosystem, forums and encrypted communication channels, and the specific word-of-mouth network of people who attend dungeon gates and stand around waiting and talk. In that ecosystem, information moves fast, and evaluations are sharp because the people making them know exactly what they're looking at. What they were looking at was an unaffiliated hunter with no clan, no backing, and no institutional support who had closed a gate that 4 team entries had failed to close 2 weeks after posting the top quarterly assessment score by a margin that had multiple senior assessors checking the methodology. The discussion in the hunter community was not subtle. I was in my Gangnam office working through documentation when Min knocked and came in with his tablet, showing me the main hunter forum thread. I read the top post, which was a detailed tactical analysis of my publicly available clearance records written by someone with obvious S-rank experience who had concluded that, whatever this hunter is, they are not operating within any framework I recognize from standard advancement pathways. The reply count was over 2,000. "Do you want me to respond to any of it?" Min asked. "No," I said. "Let it run." "There are 6 clan recruitment offers in the inquiry inbox as of this morning," he said, "including one from the Vanguard Alliance." The Vanguard Alliance was the second largest hunter organization in Korea. They were also, per my records knowledge, the organization that John Hyokdo had spent 3 years trying to absorb or neutralize through financial and political pressure because their coexistence at the top of the market was a direct limitation on Apex's expansion capacity. Having a significant recruitment relationship with the Vanguard Alliance would be, from John Hyokdo's perspective, the equivalent of me acquiring a nuclear deterrent. "Acknowledge the inquiry," I said. "No commitments, just acknowledgement." Min nodded. He was already typing. Then he paused. "There's also a personal message from someone named Jung Taeyang." I stopped what I was doing. "What does it say?" Min read it. "Incheon was interesting. I know that gate. Coffee, if you're willing. My contact information is attached." The SSS rank hunter. The one who'd said, at the quarterly assessment. The one who leaned against windows with the studied casualness of someone who was bored by everything, except the rare thing that actually interested him. I thought about Jung Taeyang's informal financial relationship with Apex. I thought about whether it was the kind of relationship that was ideological or the kind that was purely transactional. In my first life, I had never known the answer to that question because it had never mattered enough for me to find out. Now it mattered. "Reply that I'm available Thursday morning," I said, early. "How early?" 7, I said. "If he's serious about it, he shows up at 7. He showed up at 6:58, which told me something. The place I'd suggested was a coffee shop near the Han River, the same kind I'd been using since the beginning, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Jung Taeyang walked in without an entourage, without assistance, in clothes that were expensive in the way that things are expensive when the person wearing them doesn't care whether you notice. He sat down, looked at the menu for 3 seconds, ordered black coffee, and then looked at me with the same flat evaluating attention I'd seen at the quarterly assessment. "The Incheon gate," he said. "Good morning to you too," I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. 4 team entries. All failed. Same issue each time. The phasing window. Everyone who's looked at that gate assumes the window is predictable because the entity's dimensional signature drops on a consistent cycle. Except the cycle isn't time-based. It's damage-based. The entity phases when it reaches a specific internal threshold, regardless of how much time has passed. He had just described exactly why every previous team had failed in approximately 40 words. "You knew that before you went in," I said. "I've known it for 2 years," he said. "I cleared a similar entity in Japan. Different grade, same mechanic." He picked up his coffee when it arrived. "I didn't attempt the Incheon gate because solo clearance wasn't appropriate for my operational situation at the time. But you were watching to see if anyone else would figure it out." "I was watching to see if anyone else could figure it out," he said. "There's a difference." I looked at him. He looked at me. We were, I understood, having 2 conversations simultaneously, the surface one about gates and mechanics and the one underneath, which was about what kind of person I was and what Jung Taeyang was prepared to do about it. "Your relationship with Apex," I said. "Is it ideological?" "No," he said without hesitation. "Transactional." "Was," he said. Past tense. "What changed?" "The Uedo incident," he said. "The gate was misclassified. 3 hunters walked into a situation they had no preparation for. 2 of them are still in association medical care." He took a drink of his coffee. "I don't extend professional courtesy to organizations that put hunters in that position for financial reasons." I thought about that, about the flatness of his delivery, which was not cold but was very clean, the way someone talks when they've already made a decision and are simply informing you of it. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "Nothing specific," he said. "I'm having coffee." A pause. "I'm also observing that the S-rank evaluation in 3 days is being watched by approximately every significant player in Korean Hunter Society, and that the outcome of that evaluation is going to reorganize several existing assumptions about what is possible for an unaffiliated hunter. And I find reorganized assumptions interesting," he said. "I've been bored for about 4 years. That's a long time to be bored when your job is theoretically exciting." I almost laughed. Actually, almost. "Thursday," I said. "Post-evaluation, if the outcome is what you seem to be anticipating. I'll buy the second round," he said. He finished his coffee in about 3 minutes and left. The interaction had lasted 11 minutes total. I sat with my own coffee and thought about what it meant that an SSS rank hunter with no current clan affiliation had just indicated, in the oblique language of people who don't make explicit declarations until they're ready to commit to them, that he was interested in what I was building. It meant the gravitational field was shifting. I had known it would, eventually. In my first life, it had never reached this point. I had been removed from the board before any of this could develop, but I had known, with the particular clarity of someone watching a structure from the outside, that John Hyokdo's power in the Korean hunter ecosystem was held together by the assumption that no single point of resistance could accumulate enough momentum to matter. It was an assumption sustained by the fact that it had always been true. Until now, it was starting to be less true. The S-rank evaluation is not a public event in the way the quarterly assessment is. It is formally a closed proceeding. Only association officials and registered observers are admitted. Registered observers, however, include clan representatives, and every major clan in Korea had sent someone. John Hyokdo came himself. He sat in the observer gallery with Park Gi-hin and Attorney Beck and the same two Park family representatives who had been at the quarterly assessment. This time, the Park family representatives were not sitting with him. They were seated 2 rows away at the end of the gallery, in the specifically neutral positioning of people who have not made a final decision and want the seating arrangement to reflect that. I noted this when I entered the evaluation chamber. I noted John Hyokdo's face in the gallery, the absolute stillness of it, the complete absence of expression that was itself a kind of expression. I noted Jung Tae-yang in the back row, alone, with the look of a man who has decided to attend a thing and is reserving judgment. I noted Ha Yoonbi in the second row, gallery left, with a water bottle and the careful neutrality of someone who is investing a great deal of energy and appearing to invest no energy at all. Then I stopped noting things and focused on the evaluation. The S-rank evaluation is structurally different from the quarterly assessment. It runs for 6 hours, across 7 stations, and the final station is an actual gate entry, a real S-rank dungeon that the association maintains in a controlled pocket dimension specifically for evaluation purposes. The gate has been cleared hundreds of times. It doesn't reset with new variables the way the adaptive response station does. What it tests is whether you can survive and perform at S-rank reality, not S-rank simulation. I cleared stations 1 through 6 without incident. I won't walk through each one in detail because the details are technical and what matters is the shape of it, which was that I completed each station within parameters the assessors had to reach into historical records to find comparisons for. The closest comparisons, in most cases, were from evaluations conducted by hunters who were now ranked SSS. Station 7, the gate. I went in at 4 p.m. I came out at 5:43. The S-rank gate that the association used for evaluations had a documented average clearance time across all successful S-rank evaluations of 3 hours and 18 minutes. The fastest previous time was 2 hours and 51 minutes. I had cleared it in 1 hour and 43 minutes. I walked out of the gate with the confirmation crystal in my hand and handed it to the lead assessor. The gallery was completely silent. Then someone started clapping. Just one person from the back row, with the unhurried rhythm of someone who has decided that this is the appropriate response and doesn't particularly care who agrees. Jung Tae-yang. Then the gallery was clapping. Not everyone. John Hyokdo did not clap, and Park Gi-hun did not clap. And Attorney Baek was busy looking at his phone, but the Park family representatives were clapping, and the Vanguard Alliance representative was clapping, and the association officials were clapping, and Ha Yoonbi was not clapping. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not the careful, methodical observation, not the cataloging, something that was warmer and more unguarded than anything I'd seen from her in any version of my life, and which she shuddered so quickly that if I had not been looking directly at her in that moment, I would have missed it entirely. I noted it. This time I didn't set it aside. The formal result was posted that evening. Kang Siwon, S-rank, unaffiliated. The first S-rank hunter in Korea in 11 years to reach the classification without clan sponsorship. The announcement triggered the association's automated notification protocol. Every registered hunter organization in Korea received the rank update simultaneously, which meant John Hyokdo received it while sitting in his 38th floor office. I was in my Gangnam office when my phone started going. 7 recruitment offers in the first hour, a call from the Vanguard Alliance's deputy chairman, a message from Director Kim that read simply, "Congratulations. The audit notification will be issued on Friday." Which was 4 days earlier than the 3-week timeline he'd given me in our Wednesday meeting, which meant something had accelerated on that front too. Min knocked and came in with the expression of someone whose reference framework has just expanded significantly. 6 media inquiries, he said. 3 hunter news outlets and 2 mainstream platforms. Decline all of them, I said. For now. The Vanguard Alliance deputy chairman, schedule that for next week, I said. I'm not in a rush. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded and went back out. I sat in the quiet of the office. S rank. The word felt different from inside it than it had from outside it, not because of the power. I had been operating at this level functionally for weeks. It was just now officially recognized. But because of what it meant for the next phase. Because of what doors it opened and what moves it foreclosed for the person sitting on the 38th floor with his serpent cufflinks and his 40-meter portrait. My phone lit up. H, a single line. I watched you walk out of that gate. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I typed back, "What were you thinking?" The 3 dots. Then, that you're not careful enough about the things you're walking into. I stared at that. Then, and that someone should probably say something about it before the next one. I felt something move, very quietly at the back of my chest. I set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. I was still thinking about how to respond when the building's security alert went off. Not the standard alert from the emergency protocol. The one that means an unregistered hunter with active combat abilities has entered a restricted zone. I looked at the alert, looked at the building layout on my security tablet, and identified the intrusion point. Ground floor, main entrance. I was already moving toward the door when it opened from the other side. Kang Siwon stepped into my office. She looked exactly as I remembered her. That particular combination of sharp intelligence and deliberate poise that had once made me think she was the most remarkable person I'd ever met. She was wearing the kind of dress that announces its own occasion. Her engagement ring, the Park family stone, a blue-white diamond the size of a thumbnail, was visible on her left hand. She held herself the way people hold themselves when they have rehearsed an entrance. I hadn't expected her, not tonight, not for at least another month by the original timeline. "Siwon," she said. I looked at her, at the ring, at the face I had loved for 7 years and watched betray me in the exact calculated silence of someone who had made their choice and was simply waiting for the paperwork to complete. Inside, she's here because John Hyokdo sent her. He's tried every other approach, and this is the last card he thinks he has. She's the person I spent 7 years breaking myself for, and he believes that seeing her will destabilize me. He had no idea how wrong he was. Outside, I said nothing. I simply looked at her and waited. "I heard about the evaluation," she said. She stepped further into the room. "S rank! I always knew you were capable of—" "What do you want, Soyeon?" I said. She stopped. The rehearsed poise flickered. She had expected, at minimum, a reaction. Surprise, emotion, some evidence that I was still the person who had stood in a street holding a termination notice for 20 minutes, unable to move. I was not that person. "My uncle," she said, recalibrating, "is willing to offer a resolution. The audit, the investigation, the conduct filing, he's willing to step back from all of it, in exchange for a conversation about the direction you're taking things." "A conversation," I said. "About boundaries," she said. "About what you're trying to accomplish and whether it requires the path you're currently on." I looked at her for a long moment, at the ring, at the practiced evenness of her delivery, which was not emotional but was trying to pass as concerned. "Soyeon," I said, "did he tell you what the audit is going to find?" She hesitated, fractionally. "He mentioned it was administrative. 17 gates misclassified for financial gain," I said. "Documentation going back 6 years. 3 hunters still in association medical care from a breach that happened because 3 B-rank hunters were sent into a situation that required A+ grade preparation, with no briefing, because the clan's private intelligence file that would have briefed them was kept internal to protect revenue streams." I paused. "That's what the audit is going to find. And it's not going to find it because of what I've given them. It's going to find it because the documents exist, because I know where they are, and because I gave Director Lim a map." She went very still. "He's asking you to negotiate with someone who doesn't need anything from him," I said. "And he knows it, which is why he sent you instead of coming himself." I tilted my head. "What did he tell you this visit would accomplish?" Soyeon looked at me. And for a moment, for exactly one moment, the poise and the rehearsal fell away, and I saw something underneath. Not the person I had loved. I had loved a version of her I had constructed from partial information and 7 years of hope. The person underneath the poise was someone I recognized but no longer felt the weight of. Someone who had made calculated choices and was now living in the architecture those choices had built. She didn't answer. "Go home," I said, not unkindly. "Tell him the answer is no." She left. I stood in the quiet of the office for a full minute after she'd gone. The security alert had cleared. The building was empty except for me. Outside, the city was doing its usual thing, moving, lit, indifferent. My phone. H. A message that had come in. I checked the timestamp. 34 seconds after Soyeon had walked through my door. She wasn't there by accident. I stared at that for a moment. Then I typed, "What do you mean?" The response came fast, which meant she was watching the thread, which meant she'd been watching since she sent it. The engagement announcement. It's being moved up again. Not 2 weeks, 4 days, 4 days. And then, before I could respond, there's something else. Something I found out an hour ago. I'm coming to you. Don't leave. I looked at those words. Don't leave. Not a question. Not a request. The specific tone of someone who has information that requires a physical presence, and who has decided to come, and who is telling me to wait the way you tell someone to wait when the alternative is that they walk into something unprepared. I sat down. I waited. And 8 minutes later, Ha Eunbi walked through the door of my office for the second time in 2 weeks. But this time she was not carrying a healing compound, and she was not wearing the careful neutrality she'd worn in the conference room and the 38th floor and the observer gallery. She was wearing the specific look of someone who has been running a calculation in their head on the way over and has arrived at an answer they don't like. John Hyokdo, she said, has filed an emergency injunction with the association's conduct committee. Not a disciplinary petition, an emergency injunction. Different legal instrument, different counter provision. She set her phone on my desk so I could see the screen. It cites a clause in the association's founding charter, the Clan Jurisdiction Clause, which allows a registered major clan to place a formal objection to an S-rank classification if they can demonstrate that the evaluation was conducted under conditions influenced by the objecting clan's proprietary intelligence. I looked at the screen, read it again. He's claiming, I said slowly, that my performance in the S-rank evaluation was based on knowledge derived from Apex's internal dungeon intelligence files, which I had access to during my employment. Yes, she said. Which is technically arguable, she said. Legally thin, but not immediately dismissible, because it triggers a review process rather than an instant ruling. And the review process suspends the rank classification pending outcome, I said. Yes. I was quiet. There's more, she said. The injunction was co-filed by the Park family as the second signatory, which means it has bipartisan support at the clan level, 2 major organizations, which meets the threshold for the conduct committee to treat it as a priority matter rather than a standard filing. I thought about the Park family representatives at the quarterly assessment, at the S-rank evaluation, the recalibration I had seen in their expressions. I had read it as doubt in John Hyokdo, and it was. But it was also, and I had missed this, not yet a decisive break. They were hedging, keeping one foot in both possibilities. So the injunction was the hedge. If the injunction succeeded and my rank was suspended, they stayed aligned with Apex and nothing changed. If it failed, they would read the failure as confirmation that the tide had turned and adjust accordingly. They weren't enemies, they were opportunists, and John Hyokdo was smart enough to use opportunists. The conduct committee, I said. When do they have to respond? They convene in 48 hours, Hyunbi said. If the committee accepts the injunction for review, the suspension takes effect immediately pending the outcome. And the outcome timeline? The charter clause has never been formally invoked before, she said. There's no established precedent for the review process duration. It could be weeks, it could be months. I sat with that. Weeks or months of suspended classification, no ability to clear gates at S-rank, no institutional momentum. The audit proceeding? Yes, but slowly, without the accelerant of my public operational presence. John Hyokdo's pressure campaigns resuming against a softer target. The Vanguard Alliance reconsidering their inquiry, Jung Taeyang's interest cooling to the temperature of a man who respects outcomes, not potential. He had found the real window, not the conduct petition. That was a distraction. This was the actual move, the one he'd been building toward while I was managing the smaller pieces, and he had waited to deploy it until the exact moment when my elevation was freshest, when the counter-provision protections were newest, when the gap between what I had just achieved and what I could have stripped from me was at its widest. Desperate men make irrational moves, Ha Eunbi had said. This was not irrational. This was precise. This was John Hyokdo at his most dangerous. Not flailing, but calculating. Operating in the space between legal instruments with the efficiency of someone who has been using those instruments as weapons for 30 years. I looked at Hyunbi. She was watching me with the expression I had learned to read over the past weeks, the one that looked like stillness, but was actually a held breath. She had brought me this information at speed, in person, because it required that. She was looking at me now, because she was waiting to see what I did with it. The original Apex Charter, I said. The founding document, the one that the Clan Jurisdiction Clause is referencing. Yes? Do you have access to association archive records? She tilted her head. Through my old division credentials, they're still active. The founding charter was amended, I said, twice, 2023 and 2031. The Clan Jurisdiction Clause, the version John Hyokdo is citing, is from the original 2019 document. But both amendments included provisions that modified the scope of the Clan Jurisdiction Clause. Specifically, the 2031 amendment added a carve-out. The clause cannot be applied to knowledge derived from publicly registered clearance experience, regardless of where that experience was acquired, if the hunter in question has subsequently cleared one or more gates of equivalent or higher grade under independent non-clan conditions. Ha Yunbai went still. I cleared the A+ Uido gate independently, I said. Logged, time-stamped, confirmed by the association's own incident report. That gate was higher than anything in the S-rank evaluation. She stared at me, then she reached for her phone, started pulling up archive access. If the 2031 amendment carve-out applies, she said half to herself, then the injunction fails the threshold test at the initial intake stage. The committee can't even accept it for review. Well, they can't, I agreed, but only if the carve-out is correctly registered against the filing before the committee convenes. If it's not on the record when they sit down, they'll proceed under the original clause and issue the interim suspension before anyone can object. 48 hours, she said. Less, I said. The committee pre-reviews filings the evening before the convening session. If it's not registered by tomorrow morning... I know someone on the pre-review team, she said, already typing. Former colleague from the investigation division. She's thorough and she's honest, and she does not like John Hyukdo. Good, I said. We worked for 3 hours. It wasn't glamorous. It was documentation and cross-referencing and archive searches and 2 calls from Ha-Eunbi to her former association colleague and 1 call from me to my legal team and 4 drafts of a formal response document before we had one that was tight enough. She knew the association's internal document formatting requirements from 4 years of working inside it. I knew the specific language of the charter amendments because I had spent 3 weeks after my return memorizing every charter document Apex had ever filed any action under. Between us, we had every piece. At 1 a.m, the formal counter-registration was submitted to the pre-review queue. Ha-Eunbi put her phone down on my desk and sat back in the chair on the other side of it and did something I had not seen her do before. She pressed both hands over her face for a moment, and the careful professional composure was entirely gone. And what was underneath it was simply a person who had been running at high intensity for several hours and had just exhaled. I looked at her. I thought about 18 months of watching, about 4 years in the investigation division, about calibrated healing compounds and precise forward warnings and the specific way she took up space in rooms. Always peripheral, always listening, always oriented towards something she hadn't named yet. I thought about what she'd said on the phone, about walking into things unprepared. And I thought about the fact that she was here at 1 a.m, in my office, having brought me information that I had not known I needed, and having stayed to help me use it without being asked and without making anything of it. Eunbi, I said. She lowered her hands, looked at me. The composure was back, mostly, but not all the way. The edges of it were still soft. When the pre-review team looks at the counter-registration tomorrow morning, I said, and they see the 2031 carve-out correctly cited against the injunction, John Hyukdo is going to know it was you who found it. I know, she said. That puts you in a position. I know that too, she said quietly. You've been managing your position inside Apex very carefully for 18 months, I said. Your access, your connections. If he traces this back to you, then my position inside Apex is over, she said. Steady, not distressed. I've been aware of that possibility for several weeks. She looked at me evenly. I made a decision. I was quiet. About what? I said, even though I thought I knew. She looked at me for a long moment, in the quiet of the office at 1 a.m, with the city outside and nothing between us and the conversation except the desk and the distance we'd both been maintaining with the specific care of 2 people who have been aware of a thing for a while and have been deciding what to do about it. But which side of this I'm on, she said. And she held my gaze in the way she'd been avoiding doing for weeks, and the 3 seconds of that were longer than most of the significant moments I had lived through in either version of my life, and I felt the wall I had kept carefully constructed since I woke up in that conference room do something I had not given it permission to do. It cracked, just slightly, just enough. I opened my mouth. My phone went off. The Emergency Hunter Association alert tone, not the standard notification, the one that means a gate has breached containment threshold. I looked at the screen and went very still. The breaching gate was not in Uido. It was not in any of the 17 documented misclassified dungeons I had mapped. It was not in any location on any list I had built. It was inside Apex Tower. A gate had opened inside the building. Not a standard breach. The association alert was flagging an SS rank signature, the kind that doesn't happen by accident, the kind that requires deliberate intervention at the dimensional boundary level to initiate. Someone had opened an SS rank gate inside Apex Tower on purpose. And the only people with the dimensional manipulation capacity to do that, outside of SSS rank hunters, were people with access to extremely specific and illegal dungeon forcing technology that the association had been trying to locate and confiscate for 2 years. Technology that Apex's private intelligence files had contained a reference to, a reference I had read and noted and not yet fully processed, because I hadn't found where John Hyokdo was keeping it. I was already standing. "What is it?" Ha-Yoonbi said, reading my face. I showed her the alert. She looked at it. Then she looked at me, and her expression shifted into something I hadn't seen on her before. Not the calm observation, not the careful distance, not even the soft edges from a moment ago. Something sharper and colder and more focused. "He's inside that building," she said. "Yes," I said. "Soyeon is too," she said. "She lives on the 32nd floor." I was already moving toward the door. Ha-Yoonbi was right behind me. The drive to Apex Tower took 6 minutes. I ran 2 red lights, and Ha-Yoonbi didn't say a word about either of them. She was on her phone the entire ride. 3 calls in rapid succession, each one clipped and precise, the language of someone who has been in emergency situations before and has learned that full sentences are a luxury. The first call was to her former colleague on the association's pre-review team, confirming the counter-registration was flagged as urgent and would be processed first thing in the morning regardless of what else was happening. She was not going to let the injunction matter slide because a bigger crisis had emerged. Neither was I. The second call was to Director Lim. She told him about the gate signature, the location, the SS rank classification. He was silent for 4 seconds, and then said he would contact the Emergency Response Division and the association's SSS rank deployment protocol simultaneously. The third call was to a number I didn't recognize. She spoke for 45 seconds, listened for 10, said thank you, and hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "Someone who needs to know where I am," she said. I filed it. We were pulling onto the Apex Tower approach road, and the scene in front of us had already restructured itself into the geometry of a major crisis. Perimeter vehicles, association emergency units, crowd control pushing civilians back from a 2-block radius, and above it all, visible from the street because the building's exterior glass was doing something it was not designed to do, a deep violet light pulsing outward from somewhere between the 30th and 40th floors. Not from a dungeon pocket, from inside the building itself. The association officer at the perimeter recognized me from the Yoito incident and let me through without a word. I showed my S-rank credentials, still valid pending the injunction outcome in the morning, and moved. "You're not going in alone," Ha-Yoonbi said from immediately behind me. "I know," I said. "I mean, I'm coming with you." I looked at her. "The gate signature is SS rank. Your combat..." "My combat capacity is rated at A rank, and I've been operating in S rank environments for 2 years as support," she said. "And I'm the best healer in Seoul. You're going to need me more than you need me to stay out here." She was right. I hated that she was right, in the specific way you hate things that are true and inconvenient simultaneously. "Stay close," I said. "Do exactly what I tell you the moment I tell you." "Obviously," she said. And she said it with the tone of someone who finds the instructions slightly redundant, which under different circumstances might have irritated me, and under these circumstances I found, without expecting to, reassuring. We went into the building. The lobby of Apex Tower was not empty. It was controlled chaos. Security personnel in retreat from the upper floors, administrative staff evacuating through the secondary exits, 2 association combat units in full gear already in communication with whatever was happening above. The 40-meter portrait of John Hyokdo on the north wall was still lit. I noticed that, and then stopped noticing it, and found the elevator bank. "Not the elevator," Ha-Yoonbi said. "I know." "Stairwell?" We took them 2 at a time. Here is what I knew from the private files, reconstructed and processed across the 9 days between the S-rank evaluation scheduling and tonight. Apex had been in possession of a piece of illegal dimensional manipulation technology, the kind colloquially called a gate forge, for approximately 14 months. The gate forge was a device originally developed by a disgraced Hunter Association research team in 2039 and subsequently confiscated, destroyed, with all documentation sealed, or so the official record said. In reality, the research team's lead engineer had retained 1 prototype and sold it through 3 intermediaries to a buyer the association never identified. The buyer, per a single reference in Apex's internal intelligence files, was listed only as a consortium with Apex financial ties. I had flagged this reference, but not yet determined who in Apex had purchased it, where it was being stored, or what it was being preserved for. Now I knew when. John Hyokdo had opened a gate inside his own building. The question was why. And as I moved up the stairwell with Ha-Yoonbi's footsteps behind me and the violet light bleeding under the door at each landing we passed, the answer was assembling itself with the specific cold clarity of an obvious thing becoming suddenly visible. The audit notification was going out Friday. The injunction was going to fail in the morning. The Park family's co-signature on the injunction had been a hedge, and when the hedge failed, the Park family would read the result, recalculate, and begin the process of extracting themselves from their apex alignment, which meant John Hyokdo's political structure, his financial backing, his social armor. All of it was going to begin unraveling on a timeline measured in days, not months. He knew this, which meant tonight was not about the gate. Tonight was about the gate forge itself, about destroying the evidence before the audit reached it, and about creating a crisis large enough, public enough, chaotic enough that the conversation around Apex shifted from financial fraud to emergency response. In a significant enough crisis, investigations stall. Audits get deprioritized. Political capital that was evaporating gets partially restored by the simple human mechanism of rallying around a powerful organization in a moment of apparent vulnerability. He was going to burn something to save himself. And he needed the fire to be large enough to be useful. The gate on the 38th floor. His floor. I hit the door to 38 and pushed through. The 38th floor of Apex Tower looked like a dungeon had decided to use it as a summer home. The dimensional breach was centered in the private office, the one with the Han River view and the furniture that communicated wealth, which was now partially transmuted into something that didn't follow the rules of matter in the standard way. The spatial distortion extended approximately 15 meters in every direction from the breach point, which put most of the executive floor inside the affected zone. The walls were doing things walls should not do. Gravity was behaving inconsistently. The air tasted like ozone and something older than ozone. The gate entity was already partially manifested. SS rank, which meant it was large, and it was deliberate, and it would not be distracted by pain or damage below a certain threshold. It had the shape of something that had decided a shape was necessary and chosen one arbitrarily. Something between a pillar and a hand, made of compressed dimensional matter with 4 independent killing appendages currently occupied with a target at the far end of the floor. The target was John Hyokdo. I stopped for exactly 2 seconds and processed this, because the gate forge, according to everything I knew about how it functioned, required precise calibration to open a gate at a specific grade. A miscalibration of sufficient magnitude would produce a gate at a higher grade than intended, which meant either John Hyokdo had made a mistake, or someone who wasn't John Hyokdo had adjusted the calibration, or the gate forge itself had failed in a specific direction. Any of those 3 meant the same thing. The man who had opened this gate to save himself was now the primary target of the thing he'd opened. Ha Eunbi assessed the scene in approximately 3 seconds. She did not react emotionally. She began orienting herself, identifying safe zones within the distortion field, calculating sight lines for support engagement, doing the job. I moved toward the entity. I knew SS rank entities. Not this specific one. SS rank entities don't maintain individual profiles the way high-level dungeon bosses do, because they exist in a dimensional space that doesn't produce the kind of behavioral consistency that allows profiling. But I knew the class. I knew the structural vulnerabilities that SS rank compressed matter entities share regardless of their individual manifestation. I knew where to hit, in what sequence, with what intent. The fight lasted 22 minutes. I will not pretend it was clean. It was not clean. The entity's killing appendages were fast and spatially unpredictable, and it was managing the gravity distortion actively as a combat tool, which meant I was operating in a floor-becomes-ceiling environment for approximately 6 of those 22 minutes, which is as unpleasant as it sounds. I took damage in the 3rd minute and again in the 9th, the 2nd time significantly. A glancing impact from a compressed matter appendage that should have done more damage than it did, and which I was able to absorb partly because of my S-rank physical restructuring, and partly because Ha Eunbi had been tracking me the entire time, and the healing current she was running hit me within 4 seconds of the impact with a precision that told me she had been anticipating that exact moment before I was hit. She saw it coming before I did. She was, as she had stated, the best healer in Seoul. At minute 14, I found the entity's structural core, the compressed matter nexus that all SS rank manifestations of this class use as their operational center, and began the sequence. At minute 22, the entity destabilized. At minute 22 and 30 seconds, the gate it had emerged from collapsed in on itself with the specific implosive finality of a dimensional breach that has lost its anchor. The 38th floor was silent. I was breathing hard. My left shoulder was going to be significantly unhappy with me for at least a week. Ha Eunbi crossed the floor to me immediately and put both hands on the impact site, and I felt the warmth of high-grade healing current and said nothing and let her work. John Hyokdo was against the far wall, alive, physically intact, which I found neither satisfying nor unsatisfying. It was simply a fact. He had been knocked there by the entity at some point during the fight and had not moved since. Whether from injury or from the specific paralysis that occurs when a man who has spent his entire life being the most powerful person in the room is confronted by something that cannot be impressed by his rank. He was looking at me, Park Gi-hun was there too, I registered, and Attorney Beck, and 4 Apex senior members who had apparently been on the floor when the gate opened and had done what people without S-rank capacity do when an SS rank entity manifests in the room with them, which is find a wall and stay very still. The violet light was gone. The spatial distortion was dissipating as the gate anchor collapsed. Gravity had decided to be cooperative again. The floor was a floor. I looked at John Hyokdo. "The gate forge," I said. "Where is it?" He looked at me. His stillness was different from the stillness I'd seen in every other encounter. That stillness had been calculated, maintained, a tool. This was the stillness of a man whose tools have stopped working and who hasn't yet found another way to be. "East storage room," he said, quietly, without inflection. I turned to Ha Eunbi. "Can you contact Director Lim?" "Already on it," she said, phone already in her hand. The association's emergency response team arrived 17 minutes after the gate collapsed. Director Lim arrived with them. Director Kim arrived 20 minutes after that, which told me he had been either watching the situation unfold or had been notified early enough to mobilize. And either way, it meant the association was fully present and fully engaged at the highest functional level. The gate forge was in the east storage room, exactly where John Hyokdo had said it was, in a containment case that the association's technology team spent 40 minutes carefully extracting and cataloging. I watched them do it from the hallway, with my back against the wall and my left shoulder still arguing with me and Ha Eunbi standing beside me with their arms folded, and the expression of someone who has been awake for an extremely long time and has decided that this is not the moment to register that. "You knew about the gate forge from the files," she said. "I knew there was a reference," I said. I didn't have the full picture. "You figured out what tonight was about while we were in the car." "In the stairwell, actually," I said. She looked at me sideways. "You could have told me." You were making calls," I said. "You didn't need the analysis. You needed the information." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a very specific way to decide what someone needs." "I've been watching how you operate," I said. "You work faster with clean information than with explained information." She looked at me again. With the expression I was beginning to understand was her version of being surprised. Not the wide-eyed kind. The kind where the surprise is small and precise and directed inward, as though she's recalibrating an internal model. "You're right," she said. "I know," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Close to one. Park Gi-hun was brought out of the building by association officers at approximately 3 a.m. He did not look at me as he passed. Attorney Bayek passed 5 minutes later, and he did look at me with the expression of a man who has been on the wrong side of something comprehensive and is beginning to understand the full extent of it. The 4 senior Apex members came after, each of them with the specific look of people whose futures have just been dramatically restructured and are processing the shock. John Hyokdo was the last to come out. He walked without being supported. He had not been physically injured by the entity, which was confirmed by the association's medical team. He was flanked by 2 association officers. He was in the same suit he'd worn to the 38th floor for every meeting I could recall. The serpent cufflinks were still on his wrists. He walked with the residual posture of someone who is accustomed to carrying authority, even when the authority is gone. He stopped when he reached me. I didn't straighten up from the wall. I stayed exactly as I was. Tired, shoulder aching, watching him with the same steady patience I had used in every encounter since the day I'd taken my badge back. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him, in real time, processing the completeness of it. The audit documents filed, the gate forge in association custody, the gate breach on the 38th floor, which would require a full association investigation that would inevitably intersect with every financial and regulatory irregularity the audit had already identified. The Park family's co-signature on the failed injunction, which now existed in the public record as evidence of their apex alignment, making their calculated hedge actively damaging to them. The 3 hunters in association medical care, whose cases now had context. The 17 misclassified gates now fully documented. Every wall gone, every instrument broken, every avenue closed. He had nothing. I looked at him and felt nothing dramatic, not triumph, not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. The specific emotional quality of a thing that has been running for a long time finally stopping. Like a sound you've been hearing so long you stop noticing it, and then it ends, and the silence is very clean. "I should have handled your departure differently," he said. I considered that for a moment. The grammar of it, the passive construction, the absence of any acknowledgement of what the departure had actually involved, the framing of it as a management decision that could have been optimized rather than a deliberate destruction of a person's life. "Yes," I said. "You should have." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say. He had reduced himself to this. A man in a hallway with association officers on either side, talking to the person his own actions had built into the thing that had dismantled him. The officers moved him along. I watched him go. Ha Yoonbi, at my side, said nothing. She understood, I thought, that this was not a moment that needed anything added to it. The audit notification went out on Friday, as Director Kim had said it would, and the association's simultaneous announcement of the Gateforge seizure and the 38th floor incident restructured every conversation that was happening in the Korean hunter community simultaneously. The audit report, when it was published the following week in summary form, ran to 47 pages, 17 misclassified gates, 6 years of documented discrepancy. Financial irregularities spanning 11 different revenue channels. The Gateforge acquisition, sourced through 3 shell companies that the association's forensic accounting team unraveled in 4 days. The contract with the original engineer, who had been operating under a false identity since 2041 and was located in Busan and very willing to cooperate once the association made the full extent of his exposure clear to him. The Crimson Apex Clan's operating license was suspended pending the outcome of the formal investigation. All clan assets were frozen. The 47 members who had stood in a circle and watched my badge be taken were now individually navigating their own association inquiries about what they had known and when. Most of them had known very little. They were hunters, not executives. They had been in a circle because they had been told to be in a circle. Vice Chairman Lee Dong-hyun had known significantly more than very little. He was cooperative early, and his cooperation was extensive, and his cooperation mattered because it closed several evidentiary gaps that the audit team had been working around. I noted this without significant emotion. Lee Dong-hyun had spent his career being loyal to whoever held the most structural power. He had simply recalculated. Park Gi-hun had known everything. Park Gi-hun's cooperation was less forthcoming and more expensive to extract. It came eventually, after a significant period of legal resistance, and it came in pieces. Each piece was useful. None of it helped him in any meaningful way. Attorney Beck cooperated fully and immediately and had, per the association's subsequent finding, been attempting to surface concerns about the gate misclassifications through internal channels for approximately 14 months before the audit. His cooperation was, in Director Lim's formal assessment, substantive and provided voluntarily prior to any formal compulsion. I thought about the small, reluctant nod he'd given when John Hyokdo tried to invoke the unratified amendment. I thought about the expression he'd worn at almost every meeting. He had been in an impossible position and had made the choices he could make within it, which were small and insufficient but were not nothing. I asked Director Lim to note this in the formal record. He did. The Park family withdrew from the Apex alignment 12 hours after the Gateforge announcement. They issued a statement citing concerns about transparency and regulatory compliance that was the political language of people covering a retreat. The engagement between Soyeon and Park Jun-ho was quietly dissolved per a brief line in a subsequent press release due to changed circumstances. I read that line once and did not read it again. Jeon Soyeon was not part of the audit's findings. She had not been involved in her uncle's operational decisions. She lived in a building that was now a crime scene and had been engaged to a man who had just publicly exited her life, and she was dealing with those facts in whatever way she was dealing with them. I did not feel responsible for that. I also did not feel nothing about it. I put it in the part of my mind that was not the operational part and let it be what it was. The 47 members of Crimson Apex were, within 3 weeks, dispersed across the hunter community in various directions. Some were absorbed by other clans. Some went independent. 4 of them, including one I had barely known by name, sent me personal messages. 2 of the messages were apologies of the specific, uncomfortable kind that people send when they were part of something and didn't object and know it. One was a recruitment inquiry on behalf of a mid-tier clan. One was just a note that said, "I saw what you did on the 38th floor. Thank you." I replied to all of them. Different replies. The apologies I acknowledged without particular weight. The people in the circle had been in the circle because they were told to be. What mattered was what they did next. The recruitment inquiry I declined politely. The thank you I replied to with 2 words. Of course. The logistics company, the one I had registered the day after my exit from Apex Tower, the one with the 340 million won seed deposit that had grown significantly since, was not a logistics company anymore. It had been from the beginning a shell for something I was building toward, and by the 6-week mark after the S-rank evaluation, it was time to stop calling it a logistics company and call it what it was. I registered it as a hunter guild, independent, no external financial backers, no clan alliances, no political co-signatories. The only founding member of record was Kang Siwon, S-rank, formerly unaffiliated. The name I chose was deliberate and simple and said exactly what I intended it to say about what the organization was and what it wasn't. I'll leave the name out of this telling because names are less important than what they represent. And what this one represented was a structure built for the people, the existing structures had discarded. The hunters, who were too independent for clan affiliation and too capable to be left operating without support. The mid-tier independents who had been doing dangerous work with insufficient resources and no institutional backstop. The people who carried boxes and got told they were furniture. Min became the head of operations, which he had effectively been for several weeks already, and which he accepted with the economy of someone who had already assumed this outcome and was simply waiting for the paperwork. I hired 3 more people in the first week, all former Apex mid-tier hunters who had reached out in the dispersal, all of them assessed and selected based on criteria that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with what kind of person they were when things went wrong. Jung Taeyang came for the coffee Thursday morning as he'd said he would. He arrived at 6:56. He ordered black coffee again and drank it in 3 minutes and looked at the guild registration document I slid across the table with the flat, evaluating attention he applied to everything. Independent, he said. Completely, I said. No outside backing. None. Financial model, gate clearance revenue, resource processing, and a tiered support contract structure for the independent hunters who register with us, I said. We clear gates they can't access alone. We provide equipment, intelligence, and medical support. They provide mission capacity and regional coverage. He was quiet for a moment. You're building infrastructure. Yes. For who? For the hunters who don't fit anywhere else, I said. There are more of them than the major clans would prefer to acknowledge. He looked at me for a moment. The SSS Rank Consideration Board meets quarterly, he said. There are currently 3 SSS rank hunters in Korea. There's been informal discussion for 2 years about whether the board should formally establish a 4th designation. He took a drink of his coffee. Unofficially, you should know that your S rank evaluation results have been reviewed by 2 of the 3 sitting SSS rank hunters. I looked at him steadily. And? The informal consensus, he said, is that your classification timeline will be short. He set down his coffee. Which means that within 6 months, possibly less, you will be the most powerful unaffiliated hunter in Korea, and you will have built an infrastructure capable of supporting a significant portion of the independent hunter population. He paused. I want to know what you intend to do with that. Keep building, I said. He looked at me. Then he nodded. Once, the same acknowledgement he'd given at the 38th floor office, not deference, not enthusiasm, but the recognition of someone who has found what they were looking for and is assessing whether they want to be part of it. I'll be in touch, he said. He left at 7:14, 18 minutes, which was 7 longer than the last time. I sat with my coffee and thought about what that might mean. 3 days after the guild registration, I was in the office at 7 in the morning, doing what I did most mornings, which was documentation and planning and the ongoing maintenance of the structure I was building, when Ha Eunbi knocked and came in. She had been in and out of the office in the weeks since the 38th floor. Not every day. She had her own work, her own schedule, the ongoing process of formally separating from her Apex affiliation and navigating the administrative implications of that, but regularly. Often enough that Min had stopped announcing her and simply held the door. Often enough that I had started keeping her preferred tea in the office without making a formal decision to do it. She sat down across from me, not the careful, deliberate posture of our first interactions. The relaxed version, one leg crossed, bag set on the floor beside the chair, the loose ease of someone who has stopped performing neutrality and has simply become comfortable. The association formally offered me a position, she said. The investigation division? The Rank and Classification Committee's support team, she said. Specifically the Medical Assessment Division. They want someone with A-rank field experience who can evaluate hunter capacity in operational rather than just clinical terms. It's a good offer, I said. It is, she agreed. Are you taking it? She looked at me. I haven't decided yet. A pause. I had another conversation recently that's affecting the decision. What conversation? This one, she said. I'm in it now. I set down the document I was holding. I gave her my full attention, which was something I had been careful about with Ha Eunbi in every previous interaction. Not giving her my full attention all at once. Not letting her see the full weight of how precisely I'd been paying attention to her, because the full weight of it felt like something that required a specific moment and a specific readiness. I looked at her. She looked back. The guild, she said. You need a permanent medical division head. Someone with field experience, S-rank environment capacity, and association connections that are now, incidentally, quite well maintained. She tilted her head slightly. The association offer is good, but the association has a structure, and the structure has walls, and the walls have limits. She paused. I spent 4 years working inside those walls, and I know exactly where the limits are. And this, I said carefully, doesn't have those limits. This is something else, she said. Something that's being built by someone who understands what the existing structures miss and has decided to build the alternative. She held my gaze. I've been watching you build it for 6 weeks. I watched you build the legal case, the financial base, the operational capacity. I watched you handle the injunction and the gate forge and the 38th floor and the 47 audit subjects. A pause. I watched you reply to the hunter, who just said thank you with 2 words. Of course. She paused again. That's the part that told me the most. Why? I said. Because it didn't occur to you to say anything else, she said. Because saving 3 people from a miscalibrated gate was just the thing that needed doing. Not leverage, not currency, just the thing. She held my gaze steadily. That's rare. I want to work where that's the standard. I was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city was doing its morning thing. The ambient sound of it, the light coming through the east-facing window at a low angle, the particular quality of early hours in a city that never fully stops. The Guild's medical division, I said. It would require you to give up the association offer. Yes. And to step down from the position inside whatever remains of Apex's operational framework. Already done, she said. That happened 2 weeks ago. Oh, I stared at her. 2 weeks ago. When the audit report was published, she said, I submitted my formal separation the same day. She looked at me with the expression I had first seen in a conference room and had been slowly learning to read for months. I wasn't waiting to see how this turned out. I had already decided. The wall in my chest did the thing it had been doing since the night of the 38th floor. The crack from that night was wider now, and the widening was not uncomfortable. It was the specific sensation of something that has been held too long being set down, and the surprise of discovering that setting it down was something you could survive. Unbi, I said. Yes. You've been watching me for 2 years, I said. 18 months inside Apex and 6 weeks since I came back. You know more about how I operate than almost anyone. Almost, she said. I don't know all of it. No, I agreed. You don't. She waited. I remember things, I said. About this situation, about what Apex was and what was coming and what John Hyokdo was going to do. I remember things I shouldn't have access to. I held her gaze. You noted it at the quarterly assessment. Retrospective mapping. Something that develops after a near-death experience. I paused. That was accurate, just not the whole description. She was very still. There was a dungeon, I said, in Gangwon Province, an S-rank entity. It showed me something before it ended the fight. I paused. I came back from that with information about what had happened, about what was going to happen, about how to move differently this time. I watched her face carefully. The near-death experience you identified was the last one, not one of many, the only one that mattered. She sat with that. I watched her process it. Not skepticism, not the doubt of someone encountering something impossible and needing to dismiss it. The careful, precise processing of someone who has been looking at a data set and has just received the variable that makes all the anomalies resolve. That's why you knew about the charter amendments, she said. Yes. And the gate patterns, and the accountants, and the timeline. Yes. How far forward? She said. 3 years, I said. I had 3 years of what came next. Everything I've done has been working off that map. I paused. Some of it has moved differently than I expected. You moved differently. How? She said quietly. In the version I remember, I said, you were in the same building, in the same role. I was aware of you the way I was aware of anyone who was professionally present. Nothing specific, nothing that registered. I held her gaze. This time has been different. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city, the light changing as the morning advanced. Min's footsteps somewhere in the outer office, deliberately unhurried, demonstrating the excellent judgment of someone who has read a room correctly and has decided to be elsewhere. In the version you remember, she said, you didn't come back. No, I said, and the investigation never fully succeeded. The first attempt was buried, I said. A smaller second attempt got some traction. Not enough. Not the right support at the right time. She nodded slowly, and I never made contact. No, I said. I think you were building toward it, from what I know now about the 18 months before. But it didn't happen. Because you were gone before it could, she said. Yes. She looked at me with the unguarded expression, the one I had seen in flashes and always noticed and never stopped noting. Fully unguarded now, without the shuddering. The warmth in it was not the warmth of something newly discovered. It was the warmth of something that had been there a long time and was being acknowledged at last. The healing compound, she said. When I left it on your desk, the first time. I knew what it meant, I said. I didn't know what to do about it yet. And the message, she said. Be careful. Wednesday. That one, I said. I thought about for a long time. She almost smiled. Then she did smile, fully, without reservation. the version that had been hiding behind the professional composure every time I'd seen the edge of it almost surface. It was, as I had suspected it would be, completely disarming. "The Guild's medical division," she said. "I'll need access to the Association's resource database for cross-referencing field capacity assessments. I'll need a budget for equipment that's currently rated as experimental by the standard clinical framework, but has demonstrated field efficacy above the clinical control results. And I'll need direct line authority over deployment decisions in high-risk environments, not advisory authority." "Done," I said. "Done and done." "Then yes," she said. "I'll take the position." I looked at her. "That's the professional part." She looked back at me. "I know," she said. "The other part?" She paused. "The other part is the conversation we were having on the 38th floor before your phone went off." She paused again. "Which I would like to finish?" "When?" I said. She considered this with the same methodical attention she applied to everything. "Not today," she said. "Today is for the Guild and the documentation, and whatever the Association's audit team needs from you before 5 o'clock. She stood, picking up her bag. "But soon, this week." She looked at me with the steady directness that had been one of the first things I'd noticed about her in any version of my life, even when I hadn't fully understood what I was looking at. "I've waited 2 years. I don't intend to wait significantly longer." She said it the way she said everything that mattered, precisely, without drama, as a simple statement of fact. I watched her walk to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at me, and for a moment the morning light and the open door and the expression on her face combined into something I couldn't have named, but filed with the specific care I reserved for things I wanted to remember clearly. "The hunter who said thank you," she said. "The one you replied to with 2 words. Yes?" "You should reply again," she said. "He sent a follow-up message 3 days later. It's in the inquiry inbox. Min didn't mention it because it's marked personal." I blinked. "What does it say?" "He wants to join the Guild," she said. "He's a B-rank healer from Busan, no clan affiliation. His last 3 contract companies canceled on him inside a month." She held my gaze. "He's the kind of person you built this for." She left. I sat in the morning quiet for a moment, and then I pulled up the inquiry inbox and I found the message. There, flagged personal, with a careful, slightly uncertain tone of someone who has something to ask and doesn't know if they have the standing to ask it. And I read it twice. Then I clicked reply. A month after the Guild registration, I stood on the roof of our building. A proper building now, not a coffee shop, not a Gangnam office suite. A building we leased with 3 floors and a rooftop access that I used in the early mornings when the city was not yet fully awake, and the Han River was visible from the north side and the mountains were clear on the days without haze. Today was a clear day. I stood on the roof and I looked at the city and I thought about the version of this moment that had never happened. The one where Kang Siwon died in a dungeon in Gangwon province, and the investigation stalled and the misclassified gates kept running and the 47 people in the circle never had to face anything, and Ha Unbi's approach never completed. I thought about that version for exactly as long as it took to understand it fully. Then I let it go. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered enormously. Every part of it, every person who had been hurt by the things that had been allowed to run unchallenged, every hunter who had walked into a gate they hadn't been told the truth about. That mattered. The audit mattered. The 3 hunters in Association Medical Care who were recovering, who would recover, who would eventually go back to work with the knowledge that the institutional framework that had failed them was being held accountable. That mattered. But the version where Kang Siwon died was not this version. And standing in this version, rehearsing the other one, was not a use of time I was interested in. I had a guild to build, a medical division head who had very specific equipment requirements, and was going to make them happen, regardless of what the standard clinical framework thought about it. A B-rank healer from Busan who had just arrived on the 2nd floor with the slightly dazed expression of someone who expected a waiting list and had instead been called in on day 1. An analyst who was currently putting together the most comprehensive independent dungeon intelligence database in Korean hunter history. An SSS rank hunter who sent brief, infrequent messages that consistently arrived at exactly the moment I was about to need the information they contained. I had a conversation to finish. This week? Soon? I had the next phase to build toward. And the phase after that, and the specific and quiet understanding that I was no longer operating from fear or desperation or the anxious urgency of someone who believes they're about to run out of time. I was operating from surplus, from the compounded advantage of having seen what not to do and choosing differently, from the particular strength of someone who has been at the bottom and knows, with total certainty, that the bottom does not define the ceiling. The city was waking up below me. The Han River was silver in the early light. Somewhere inside the building I could hear the sounds of people arriving, the specific acoustic texture of a space that is being inhabited by people with purpose. I had started this on the day they stripped my rank and threw me out, and I had ended it. Or rather, I had ended one arc of it, because the world doesn't end, it just changes shape. On a rooftop, with good weather and the kind of quiet that isn't absence but fullness, I thought about what came next, not with anxiety, with the calm of someone who has surveyed the terrain and knows where they're walking. There was more ground to cover. There always was. The SSS rank consideration board and what Jung Tae-yang had said about the timeline, the independent hunter network and the 47 municipalities still operating with inadequate gate support, the association's internal reform conversations that Director Lim had been having and that were going to require external pressure from exactly the kind of entity I had just built in order to move forward. The conversation that was going to happen this week in my office or possibly over dinner, she had not specified, and I found I was, for the first time in either version of my life, comfortable with not knowing the specific shape of something good before it arrived. I stood on the roof until the city was fully awake. Then I went downstairs. There was work to do.